Hello. Hi. Would everyone take their seats, please, if you're not seated? We're going to begin. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Advanced Driver Assistance Systems Roundtable discussion, jointly hosted by the National Transportation Safety Board and the National Safety Council. My name is Amy Terone, and I'm a safety advocate in the Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications at the NTSB, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies today. So a few quick notes to mention. The emergency exits are located right behind me. It's hard to miss if anything happens. And the bathrooms are out the door to the left. We have some drinks and coffee out front for attendees of this session. And the event will be recorded. There's 2 cameras in the back, and we are webcasting live. So welcome to our online viewers. If you have any questions about the event or the facilities, you can please see me or someone at the back table. So now time is short, so let us begin. I'm very proud to introduce our keynote opening speaker, Ms. Deborah Hersman. Deborah Hersman is President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Safety Council. The NSC saves lives by preventing injuries and deaths at home, at work, in communities, and on the roads through leadership, research, education, and advocacy. Prior to joining the National Safety Council, Ms. Hersman served as chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board from 2009 to 2014. Ms. Hersman was first appointed as an NTSB board member by President Bush in 2004 and was reappointed to 2 additional 5-year terms by President Obama in 2009 and 2013. Among her many initiatives as chairman, Ms. Hersman focused attention and actions on distracted driving, child passenger safety, and helping victims and their families. And rumor has it she is a lover of trucks and trucking and may even have a CDL, so we'll have to ask her about that. But she is really here today because she shares a common cause with the NTSB. She's dedicated to transportation safety, to saving lives, and preventing injuries. So now, Ms. Hersman, my former chairman and now partner in safety.
Amy, thank you so much, and welcome everybody to the Chicagoland area. Isn't the weather great today? For those of you who traveled from DC, hopefully it's a few degrees cooler and not so humid for you. It has been a great pleasure for me to work both with the NTSB and the NSC, and I want to extend my appreciation to the staffs of both organizations, and in particular for the NTSB staff traveling to the Chicagoland area. We had a great event last October focused on passenger cars, and it's the time that we're going to focus on commercial fleets today. So I know we have, at earlier count, about 100 folks that were on the webcast with us, so I want to extend a welcome to you all as well. Thank you for joining us. Many of you are familiar with NTSB's position and also the NSC's efforts in this space, but the NTSB has advocated for driver assistance technologies for more than 2 decades. They've produced reports that have explored and advocated for improved safety technology, and they've issued 14 specific safety recommendations urging the use of collision avoidance technologies to prevent fatalities and injuries. The NTSB has included the need for collision avoidance technologies on their most wanted list of transportation safety improvements. This indicates that this is an area that the board believes has the greatest potential to save lives and prevent injuries. We're all here, every single one of us, because we believe that the advances in technology have the potential to make commercial fleets safer. According to MEMA, advanced driver assist systems can potentially prevent 40% of crashes on our nation's roads every year and get us that much closer to zero. I want to talk to you about another mode of transportation, railroads. Railways were once the only way in this country to move heavy freight. And at the turn of the century, railroads were one of the most dangerous places to work. Back in the early 1900s, 48% of workplace fatalities occurred on the railroads. Thousands of workers were maimed and lost their lives performing deadly, dangerous work. That was an accepted reality. But then several innovations created the tipping point for improving railroad safety. Equipment like air brakes and automatic car couplers were game changers. For example, within 10 years of a congressional mandate for the use of automatic car couplers, coupler-related deaths decreased by 80%. Within 100 years, railroad on-duty employee fatalities have dropped precipitously from several thousand per year to about 15 per year. Led by safety sponsors, people who instinctively understood that 0 was the only acceptable number in that industry, injuries and fatalities on the job and culture shifted so that they moved close to 0. Once acceptable risks became tragedies to be avoided at all costs. The shift that we experienced in rail safety 100 years ago represented a triumph of tech innovation and advancing a positive safety culture. ADAS can be a game changer for heavy-duty trucks and make them safer than they are today. When I told you 48% of workplace fatalities occurred on the railroads at the turn of the century, I bet you were surprised and appalled at that high number. But today, 40% of workplace fatalities take place on the roads. And we know that the transportation industry is one of the more dangerous occupations where people can work, and 95% of the fatalities in the transportation industry occur on our roadways. So let's talk about some specific types of events that could be avoided. Rear end and lane departure events, two types of crashes that technology that exists today could prevent. We're on the cusp of another safety triumph. The challenges and the costs, we totally appreciate that, are real. But when compared to the life-saving potential, not to mention the costs of litigation, road closures, and more, technology is a wise investment. We know that heavy-duty truck operators are already heavily regulated and subject to restrictions that passenger vehicles and passenger vehicle drivers are not. Amy mentioned I went through CDL training myself. I had school bus, air brake, and passenger endorsements. But just like today, the safest thing that I can do for transportation and trucking is leave it to the professionals. And I think today we're going to actually hear from some of the professionals here in this room about some of the challenges and opportunities that you all face. But regardless of the commitment when it comes to professional, highly trained human operators, we have to face the facts that heavy-duty vehicles can cause a disproportionate impact in certain events. For example, the rear-end collisions that I mentioned earlier can be particularly dangerous. We typically see 3 times the number of fatalities as a similar passenger car event when it involves a heavy vehicle. This is where ADAS can really come into play. We can learn from our partners and operators across the country, as well as across the Atlantic. For example, a core group of fleet operators in the United Kingdom have joined to voluntarily raise safety standards and create a special accreditation now seen as essential to work on certain contracts. It didn't happen overnight, but there are 4,500 members of the Fleet Operator Recognition Scheme in the UK. The FORS group recognized that by leading by example, they can actually raise the bar for Europe's transport industry as a whole. We've seen this in other areas in the United States, certainly in the aviation industry, in offshore operations, in the Gulf with helicopters. The NTSB studied this. Operators can collectively raise standards for others. And in order to get to zero, we're going to have to do it in a timely fashion. We'll need strong standards. We'll need strong regulation. I see our friends from FMCSA here. But we'll also need voluntary commitment from fleet operators like the people who are in this room. We also need manufacturers to take a leadership role. I remember several years ago visiting a manufacturer of motor coaches, and prior to the requirement to have three-point belts on those buses, that manufacturer made a decision that all of their buses would have come equipped with three-point belts unless people asked for them not to. So there are lots of ways to lead. It doesn't have to always be through regulation. Voluntary efforts are important as well. If any of you all have been to a car show recently, you know that the rapid pace of technology advancement is occurring in spite of lack of regulations. It is moving forward. Several years ago, when I was at the NTSB, I had the opportunity to visit one of the suppliers who's in this room, and they demoed a big rig that had emergency braking capacity. We went through a test track, and there was a driver in a minivan in front of us. We were following in the tractor trailer. That minivan did not give us notice, but they slammed on their brakes. The driver of the truck didn't touch the brakes, and the vehicle stopped. As a minivan driving mother of three, that was an awesome example of the power of technology, and it made me really excited about what the future held. On Friday afternoon, I spoke with one of your colleagues. Some of you may know Alexi Carley. She heads up Environment, Health, and Safety for UPS, and she was sharing with me that UPS has made a commitment to get all of their new vehicles equipped with automatic emergency braking. So in less than 10 years, we have the opportunity to move from something being demoed in a supplier test track to a nationwide fleet voluntarily installing technology in their equipment. And they aren't just talking about new manufacture, they're talking about how do they look at retrofit. So we have the potential to use game-changing technology today, but we've got to invest in that technology, we've got to invest in our fleets, and we also have to commit to improving that technology with operational experience. We need to ensure that drivers know how to use that technology appropriately and that they're not misusing it or confused by it. I know we've got a number of folks in the room who are watching very closely what happens in the cab of vehicles, and I know that they have some lessons learned to share with us as well. At the NTSB, we made a lot of recommendations, and one of the things that I learned during my 10 years there is there are always unintended consequences. Regardless of how good you think a law, a regulation, or a recommendation is, there's always things that happen that you can't foresee. And so, how do we address the unintended consequences when we introduce new systems, new processes, and new technologies into our fleets? How do the people in this room take the opportunity like today to inform one another about the lessons that they've learned so we don't fail slowly, but that we adapt quickly and we accelerate the life-saving potential of ADAS? How do we in turn get drivers to accept, to trust, and to use ADAS wisely? And how do we prevent, like we saw in the aviation industry, an over-reliance on the technology when we're truly far away from true autopilot capabilities? How do we balance both the benefits as well as the unintended costs and consequences, because technology will not be an immediate panacea for highway fatalities. Our team at NSC has led a consumer-focused campaign to unwrap the mysteries of various bells and whistles that are found in consumer vehicles through My Car Does What. MyCarDoesWhat.org walks people through how to simply understand the technology in a vehicle and manufacturer agnostic way. Do we need something similar for commercial fleets? We will have to be smart, and we'll also have to be strategic with regard to driver training and ADAS interaction. In passenger cars, nearly 40% of drivers report turning off the safety features and the advanced technology. So all of the technology in the world won't make a difference if drivers are not willing to use it, or they don't understand it or turn it off. We'll need to ensure drivers are staying engaged in the driving task. With more and more technology around us and surrounding us, being in the cab of a truck is like being in an office. Everything is there. We don't want them to then use the technology systems as a crutch and really adapt to those technologies and exhibit unsafe driving behaviors. We can draw lessons from other modes of transportation as well as passenger vehicles, and of course, implementation challenges are why we're here. We've got a great lineup for today's roundtable to address many of the questions. I see so many smart people who've been really generous with their busy schedules and their time to be here together. We've got a lot of passionate advocates and knowledgeable safety experts here in the room. I know we have a lot of people who are watching on the webcast, but we have got to take these current challenges that we have and identify the opportunities. How do we bring about the next safety culture shift? It will take technology, but it will also take education, innovation, and cooperation to get us where we need to be. I'd like to turn things over now to the really smart people who have put this together and organized this event. NTSB's Highway Safety Director, Dr. Rob Malloy, and NSC Senior Director for Digital Strategy and Content, Alex Epstein. Together, these two gentlemen are going to guide and lead our discussions today and make sure that we capture all the takeaways and the big ideas to share with you and the rest of the industry. Thank you all so much for being here, and I hope we have an excellent discussion this afternoon. Dr. Malloy and Alex.
So I wanted to thank everyone for coming today. This is our second event we've shared with the National Safety Council. Our first one focused on light vehicles. I think it was an appropriate focus considering that heavy vehicles are involved in about 5,000 fatalities a year, but light vehicles about 20 to 25,000. Focused on the big problem first. The reality is, in some ways, that big problem is moving ahead of the smaller problem here with heavy vehicles. We're going to do 4 sessions kind of planned, focusing on different areas. Our first session will look kind of at where we are today with the technology. Our second session, one of the most critical parts of the driver assist technology is how the drivers accept the technology. As Debbie just said, drivers in passenger vehicles are not accepting the technology. Third session, we'll be looking at how do we get to the point where every vehicle has this technology on board. I think we've seen in research studies, in simulator studies, on-the-road field tests, and testing by companies who are using it today, that this is effective technology, but how do we get it on the roadway? And then the last session, we'll kind of be bringing that all together to the challenges that we have in moving forward. And so that's kind of the roadmap we're going to go. Alex and I are going to try to be facilitators. I'm with the National Transportation Safety Board, Director of Highway Safety. I'll let Alex say, where he's associated with.
I'm with the National Safety Council. I head up a digital content production team and the national education program that Debbie referenced called My Car Does What, heading up the automation initiative at the National Safety Council. I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. As Debbie said, we really appreciate you all for being here. And as Rob said, we'd like to be facilitators. We'd like to allow you to participate as much as possible. There won't be any pre-planned PowerPoints. This is just about a discussion.
And with regard to that, again, every one of you here, 20 people, are all working towards the same thing. I've been with the Safety Board now for 21 years. I have never been out investigating, either my teams or myself, an accident where we couldn't come up with something that would have prevented or reduced the severity of the accident. I am so glad that the National Safety Council is leading up the effort, and 200+ organizations have joined on Vision Zero, because the reality is whenever we go out to a crash, there is something that would have prevented that. I encourage anybody who has not joined that coalition to join it, because it's not myself working, it's not Debbie working, it's everybody working together. I will say one thing. I promise to be a facilitator for most of the time, but I am going to take a quick sidebar to talk about my job just a little bit. In the last 3 weeks, I decided to take a vacation for a week. During that vacation, we had 2 different cases of tractor trailers plowing into the back of vehicles, in each case causing 6 fatalities. My teams correctly made the decision not to send anybody out. The week after, when I was back, I had the same decision involving a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old who died in the back of a minivan being struck by a heavy vehicle that came upon a queue. One of the reasons we didn't send teams is we've seen this so many times. We've made recommendations that would fix it. I've got 2 investigations ongoing right now, one involving a bus with about 14 fatalities, another involving a SUV with 6 fatalities that got hit from behind by a truck. In the case of the bus actually hit the truck from behind. But both of those cases, there's proven technology to fix this. And it's happening too much. And that's the only thing I'm going to say now as far as just a charge for everyone here is the technology's here today. I love seeing that we're going to have automated vehicles, that I am going to be watching movies instead of driving my car while I go places, that I may even drive to Chicago because it'll be so much fun to just be able to relax and sleep in my car. But I think some of the problem there is it's getting in the way of the technology we have today that is actually the building blocks for that automation technology. So I want to talk about what we can do today. To be fair to everybody, the 20 people here have given of their time. I'd like you all to go around the room, just introduce who you are, who you with, and what your connection to ADAS technology is. And I'm going to ask you to do it in 12 seconds. No, I'm going to give you about a minute to do so, okay? So thank you. We'll start on this side.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Tom DeSalvi. I'm the Vice President of Safety at Schneider National Incorporated. I've been with Schneider for 26 years. Schneider is a provider of truckload, intermodal, and logistics services headquartered in Green Bay, Wisconsin. My connection with ADAS is we have a fleet of which we have equipped with a variety of safety technologies to include automatic emergency braking, of which we started 5 years ago and have had some very favorable results as a result of that, and look forward to sharing that with the group at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Richie Hong with Daimler Trucks. I'm the manager of engineering and safety. My job really kind of spans a whole gamut of things where it deals with investigation, defects, and even the safety side really for crash avoidance technologies. So my time with ADAS is working with development teams and understand the safety sort of data that goes with developing these systems and deploying them.
Hello, everyone. Tim LaFawn. I'm Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Volvo Group. I manage product safety and regulatory compliance, and I have the privilege to be here today. And my main role is defects and safety-related defects and non-compliances, but also I work with accident investigations. So I've worked some of the accidents that you speak of. You know, with unfortunately we have incidents where there's you know, traffic that's stopped in a construction zone or wherever. But I also participate with our engineering group and provide guidance and help make decisions on what we are doing as a company from the perspective of safety. I've got some good news to share later, but we'll hold that for now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Adam Grigori. I'm the President and CEO of Sentinel Transportation. I'll make a bet that no one in here knows who Sentinel is, and that's a good thing. That's exactly the way we like it. We're the private fleet for Phillips 66. We've been in business for over 21 years, both as a joint venture between DuPont and Conoco as its predecessor, and now Phillips 66. We operate roughly 300 to 400 trucks, have about 550 drivers, and run about 25 million miles a year, all in the oil and gas business today. The reason why we're here today is that we pride ourselves in being the safest carrier on the road. If you look at our history and what we've hauled and to our performance today, we do things that can hurt a lot of people, and so we are critically focused on the safety performance each and every day. And so as many of these companies up here, we're a customer of theirs. We're an early adopter of all technology. We've had cameras in the trucks for over 10 years. We've had collision avoidance and lane departures for a number of years. And we're here to talk about the benefits of having a safe, equipped, a properly equipped truck and trailer to avoid any potential safety event that occurred, and keep not only our employees and their families safe, but more importantly, the motoring public around us. So thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Krieb. I'm with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and I work in our Office of Vehicle Safety Research. I lead a group that conducts research on both light and heavy vehicle crash avoidance systems, as well as light and heavy vehicle connected vehicle technology. The products of our group's research really, I think, do two things. One is just inform the discussion. Events like this, and they're available. We issue reports. They're certainly available to fleets and others to hopefully make more informed decisions about what technology might make sense for the particular fleet they operate in. The output of our work also certainly informs our rulemaking group, as technologies mature, to help with potential regulatory decisions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to participate on the roundtable. I'm Dr. Kelly Riegel. I'm the Associate Administrator of Research and Information Technology at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Our connection to ADAS is, as you may know, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. We develop and we enforce rules and regulations related to the safe operating performance of commercial motor vehicles. I also lead the research group, and we have research in three primary areas: on the vehicle, safety technology on the vehicles, on the drivers, and the carriers themselves. And like my colleague here at NHTSA, research is performed really to inform some of the rules and regulations and regulatory agenda. Thanks.
Is it already on? Yes? Okay. That's the line. Hi, everybody. My name is Uri Tamir from Mobilized Vision Technologies. We're an Israeli-based ADAS and autonomous driving company. and I'm here basically, I guess, to represent more the technology side. We work with OEM vehicle manufacturers, and we could find Mobilized technology in about almost 250 vehicle models, but we also work with a lot of retrofitting and aftermarket, which we believe is also as important aspect if you want to really achieve zero fatalities as fast as possible.
Good afternoon. I'm Fred Andersky with Bendix Commercial Vehicle Systems. We have been in the safety business or the braking business for over 80 years, and we manufacture, we're a tier 1 supplier to a number of the OEMs. We manufacture advanced driver assistance systems as well as supportive safety systems for commercial vehicles, primarily class 6, 7, and 8 air braked vehicles. We work with Mobileye, and we compete with Meritor WAPCO. So it should be an interesting conversation.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ananda Pandey. I'm with WAPCO North America. WAPCO is a developer of safety, efficiency, and connectivity products for heavy trucks. Our products, safety products in North America, are applicated and distributed by our joint venture, Meritor WAPCO. My role is I'm a team leader for advanced driver assistance systems and research and development at WAPCO North America. Through my career, I've been involved in development of several ADAS products, launched collision mitigation, lane departure, driver monitoring systems, both in the US as well as other regions of the world. Before joining WAPCO, it's been 5 years for me at WAPCO. Before joining WAPCO, I was with Bendix, worked together with Fred as well. So we are here together for a good cause. So I think it's going to be a good conversation here.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Crescenzo from Lancer Insurance Company. I'm the Vice President for Safety and Loss Control. Lancer Insurance Company is a commercial automobile insurance company. We specialize not only in passenger transportation, commercial passenger and transportation vehicles, but in long-haul truck and short-haul truck as well. Our goal here is to talk about the practical outcome, both of cameras, of all the equipment that could be used, and the impact of claims and crashes on not only the industry, but on the public. We have a very strong interest and a concern about safety and training. We're an insurance company who spends a great deal of time providing resources and information and technology access to our policyholders. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Somerville. I'm the founder and CEO of Fleetio. We are a fleet software platform, relatively newcomer as compared to some of the other organizations up here. We're about 6 years old as a company. We're primarily focused on apps, mobile apps, and particularly in the safety realm, we have an app that tracks driver safety, particularly around phone usage while they're driving. We also are really focused on inspections as well, and just really excited to be here.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Johnson. I'm with Lytx DriveCam. Lytx is the global leader in video technology. In addition to our video solutions, we also provide ADAS systems, but we also harness the power of the data that comes from that. We have been providing video technology to pretty much close to about 650,000 drivers globally right now. So as many of you know, this is a technology that really has advanced in the last couple of years. One of the reasons I'm also passionate about being on the panel today is I've spent over 30 years of my life on the trucking industry side, on the occupational side. So like many here, have spent the time trying to address the challenges we have out there in safety. So I appreciate the invite as well to be a part of this great panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Park. I'm the equipment editor at Heavy Duty Trucking Magazine. So I'm a journalist here. I've had lots of experience driving trucks with this equipment. I don't sell it, I don't design it, I don't manufacture it, and I don't try and twist people's arms to get it put into their trucks. However, I do talk to fleets who use the equipment, and I talk to the providers of the equipment, try and get a sense of what it's supposed to do, how well it works by talking to the fleets after the fact. So I have the benefit of altitude here. I'm not in the trenches with all this, but I do observe everything that goes on in the industry. Prior to becoming a journalist, I spent 20 years as an over-the-road driver, 2 million mostly safe miles. I've been in trucking since 1978 in one way or another. I love the industry, and I'm really excited about what's happening here today and in the industry generally with regards to safety.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael LaPonte. I'm with the National Transportation Safety Board, and I'm an accident investigator in the Office of Highway Safety. My specialty is motor carrier regulations. Prior to that, I was with FMCSA and 40-plus years in the industry. And like my associate here, drove 14 of those, mostly accident-free. And my connection is that most of the accidents, at least the ones so far that I've been involved with the board, have elements in them that certainly could have been avoided or mitigated had this technology been used or adopted. So that's why I have an interest in this, and I want to thank you for allowing my participation.
My name is Kevin Grove. I'm with the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. I work in the Center for Truck and Bus Safety, and we at Virginia Tech do research with all levels of automation, everything from ADAS technologies up to higher levels. And we tend to focus on what we call edge cases, which is often where the technology and the human behind it interface, whether it's the technology asking for something from the driver, or the technology intervening automatically, or even the driver expecting to receive something from the technology. And we completed a naturalistic study with the support of NHTSA in order to find out how these technologies were actually working in the real world, how drivers were experiencing the technologies. So that was really interesting for us to learn about what the driver's experiences are with this technology.
Hello, I'm Eric Teo. I'm a senior statistician with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. We're a nonprofit research and communications organization fully funded by many of our nation's auto insurers. And our role is to figure out in highway safety what works and what doesn't work to make the problem better, and to communicate that to all interested parties, whether that's government, manufacturers, or consumers. I, in particular, do a lot of studies on large trucks as well as some automation and ADAS.
My name is Mike Camise. I'm with the American Trucking Associations, where I'm Vice President of Safety Policy, Connectivity, and Technology. We have a great cross-section of members. We have fleets, large, medium, small. We also have some of the technology providers, tier ones, and some of the manufacturers as members. And we give it gives a good platform for sharing of information, learning about the technology that's available. And then we also have a group called the Technology Maintenance Council, which looks at some of the practical aspects of the technology in terms of speccing it for your trucks, what you need to look for, and the maintenance issues that may arise from it.
Good afternoon. Gary Petty, President and CEO of the National Private Truck Council. We are an independent national trade association representing the private carrier industry. We've been around since 1939. We represent companies that are manufacturers, distributors, retailers of products across all manner of industries. Many of these companies that are members not only operate private fleets, but they are for-hire authority carriers, where they use that capacity of their private fleet, sell it to the market, and in effect compete as a for-hire carrier. They're also users of third-party services. Our organization focuses very intensely on safety. It's our number one priority. We do an annual benchmarking survey every year. We're just reporting this year one of the most rapid adaptations of active safety technologies in our history, and we've been tracking this for 10 years. It's very impressive to see this, not only how companies are using this technology in various combinations but how they are making a financial cost justification, ROI, for doing so. One of the keys in our industry is the drivers that work for our companies often stay very long, 10 to 15 years. And so they're around, the companies have them around to be part of an ongoing training and coaching program to use this technology. So we're very pleased to be here, and we look forward to discussing how this technology can affect an even safer roadway in America.
I'm Sean Kildare, Director of Research for Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. We're a unique coalition of public health, safety, and consumer groups, insurers, and insurer agents. We believe in a strong federal role in getting this technology out there. We follow everything from the inception of the concept of the technology all the way through regulation and try and help usher it through. We do support getting these safety technologies in there. We think it's going to go a long way to making a dent in the 4,000 lives that are lost every year, the 100,000 injuries that are incurred. And we see this also as a stepping stone of getting these technologies out there because they are going to help us move to those higher levels, that the principles you learn, say, with autonomous braking are going to help lead to the higher levels of automation and making sure it works properly when you no longer have the backstop of the human driver for what it is.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Lewis, Director of Driver Programs for the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, or AMVA for short. AMVA is a 501c3 organization that represents the chief driver licensing and law enforcement officials in the United States and Canada. We are involved in the testing and licensing of both commercial and non-commercial drivers, the registration and titling of all the vehicles, and of course our law enforcement arm is concerned with enforcing of highway safety laws. I'm here actually to discuss the impacts of the ADAS technology on driver testing and driver licensing for commercial motor vehicle operators.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I am so glad, again, that everyone mentioned safety as a key role. I've got two other comments to make with regard to how we're about to proceed when we start the next session, because I'm only running 10 minutes late already. But I'll make it up by talking a little bit shorter myself. One, each of you may have a card that was on the seat. It may be underneath you right now. On this card, feel free to write any questions that come up as you're thinking. This is not about Alex and I coming up with all the questions. It really is about a group and trying to get some synergy, to use a business kind of term, between this group here. And really, the people who know best about this technology is not Alex or I. It's the people sitting at these tables and the people in this audience. And you're the ones for the best questions. So by all means, fill these out. We will try our best to get to them. Ms. Morrison, one of my II investigators in charge with the safety board, who also was a vehicle expert, will be collecting any cards that you have. Now here, I think the best way to handle things is I'm going to direct a question at somebody, maybe a group of people, and then everyone's going to start talking at once. No, we're not going to have that. What we're going to have is a system that, I know Mike's going to want to talk a lot. So when he's ready to talk, he's going to flip his name tag up to a vertical position. I'm going to be walking around the room, and I'm going to look, and I'm going to say, okay, I know that's coming. I'm going to hope that not all 20 of them are up at the same time, but if they are, I will work something out. I know you all have a lot of things to add. I want you to add, because this is really about you all sharing, and not so much about me interrogating you. Otherwise we would have done this as a hearing, and everyone would have had one comfort level and not wanting to come. They've brought their lawyers with them. So this is a sharing between you all. But I am going to say, I've been at the board since 1996. And in 2001, I got to see a presentation showing me how an Eaton-Vorad system would have prevented several crashes. And the take-home message for us is this is available today. Let's get it out on all the trucks. We're 17 years later. Eaton-Vorad is no longer a separate company. But I'll admit there were things wrong with those systems, with high false alarms. If you broke every time that thing went off, you'd make it about 100 feet an hour. But The reality is there's improvements been made, and I'd like to throw this over to the manufacturers of the systems, and I'll let Bendix, based on a coin flip I did in my hotel, take the first shot at where are we with the state of the art right now from your perspective, and then I'll have others comment on that.
Well, I'll start with, we're a lot farther along than we were with the VORAD system, the old bridge detection system, and I can say that because we own VORAD now. We're the ones who picked them up. But what VORAD did was it really did lay out the foundation that technology could help deliver a safety response to truck drivers and to fleets. And so from that evolution, which really started with a radar on the front of the vehicle, we've moved forward and we've advanced. Now, from our perspective, we really started with the ABS technology. That really became the foundation for the future in a lot of these technologies, because from ABS, we were able to add some additional sensors to get full stability or electronic stability control technology. And now that really becomes the foundation. We add a radar, we get adaptive cruise control, beef up the software in the radar, we get collision mitigation technology, and now we're at the point where we've added a camera to work with the radar to get even more higher levels of collision mitigation, as well as integrating what today are separate systems, lane departure warning, speed sign recognition, which allows us now to be able to start putting together these and prioritizing the alerts for drivers. So not only do they get the information they need quickly to make a decision, we avoid some potential distractions of multiple systems going off at once. Those are the active safety side. The other thing that I think is important in these technologies as we continue to move forward, we do see these as the foundation to get to future automated technologies and eventually to autonomous technologies. But we also see that these technologies do deliver a return for the fleets. Different fleets have different needs, and so sometimes it's not easy to sit back and just have a general, statistic that says buy this technology and it'll solve X percent of problems. The reality is for different fleets, different levels of result occur, but results do occur, and I think that's important. Lastly, the data. Information is also part of these systems, and being able to pull that information off the vehicle enables fleets to be able to take advantage, to be able to help their drivers understand better situations that they may be encountering, such as following too close or maybe going too fast or swerving out of lane a little bit too much, that with training can help improve their performance overall. So today, collision mitigation technology, level 1, really is where we're at, but the future is wide open in terms of where we're going to go.
Well, to add to what Fred just said, right? The technology has advanced very much, right? When we first started with or when Eaton VORAD system was around, the sensing technology that the radar used was different than what we have available today, right? So what WAPCO uses is a long-range radar, and with that, we are able to detect the objects way ahead of time, and it gives us the time to prepare and react properly, so that the driver is able to go through the sequence of warning and then decide if he wants to take over, or if the driver doesn't react, then the system applies the brake on it. The other thing is the human factors also become very important, right? So we don't want to just warn the driver and, okay, there is a situation because the driver he got himself into that thing, right? So he wasn't actually paying attention to the traffic. So WAPCO has paid attention to what kinds of modes gets the driver's attention much quickly, like haptic feedback, right? I've been involved in several human factor studies as well. If you want to say, if there is a visual warning in front of you, you can read all the text, and that gives you all the information that you want, but it takes more time for you to react because you read it line by line. An audible alert next, gets a little bit faster. You're doing something else, and you're going to beep, and then you're trying to pay attention to what that sound was for. And then mostly, a haptic feedback goes right on your spine, and the driver is able to react much faster, right? So that's how the warning cascades have been defined, and the sensor technology have changed, and it's a state of the art today to warn the drivers, have a proper warning cascade, and as Fred also said, the foundation of ABS and stability is the key, right? All these ADAS systems is built on top of that, and if we have issues with the ABS systems, then whatever the sensor technology is, it's not going to help, right? So that needs to be addressed.
Okay, Fred?
So I just want to add one point and agree wholeheartedly with what Ananda said. But the important thing to remember about where we are today is these are driver assistance systems. They're not driver replacement systems. Driver is still integral in terms of the safety equation today. We're not at the point of autonomous vehicles. Okay, we're not at the point of the driver just being able to press cruise control and hop in the back and make himself a cup of coffee or something like that. These are driver assistants. They're to back up the safe driving practices and safe driving habits that drivers have today. So when we look at safety, and it's one of the points I do want to make sure of, it's not just the technology. Okay, the technology is part of it, but there's still driver training. There's still utilizing the data. There's still government regulation and paying attention to government regulations. All these things together really deliver what will become more safety for commercial vehicles in the future.
Great. Mike?
And Rob, in the introduction, you mentioned that it seems that automation is maybe taking attention away from some of the ADAS. And I think to some extent that's true in some of the media coverage of it. We can let Jim talk about that. But in terms of the development of the technology, it's actually, this is a glass half full. It's creating more work in on these basic building blocks. And so I think all the work on automation is improving these systems so that the technology is going to be developing even more rapidly than it would otherwise.
With the camera-based systems and potential retrofit, could anyone have a comment towards that?
Sure. First of all, I would like to start with saying that I think that the ability of ADAS to make the road safer is no longer up for debate. I think we have abundant of research and data on the value of ADAS in saving lives, reducing crashes by our friends in NHTSA and FMCSA and IHS, Mobilized, and the industry itself. We have also much more data proving this. I think the focus must now be on the regulation, on the deployment, on how to facilitate the penetration rate of ADAS. And regarding technology, then it's a very interesting time because as you started, the technology is mature, is already commercially available. But with the focus on cameras, so with cameras, it's not only you can detect and classify objects, but you can also understand the semantic of the object, which basically allow you to have many more features, such as speed limit indication, traffic sign recognition, but not only that. We will going to introduce very soon forward collision warnings, which can enable also AEB for many other types of collision, not just rear-end collisions. So we're talking about also a T-bone, head-on collision, side swap collisions. Basically, it's going to to include some other kind of collision as well, as also going to introduce some other kind of features such as traffic light recognition. So imagine a world where the driver or the vehicle stop if we notice that the vehicle is going to run through red light or not stop and stop sign. So all this kind of new technology is about to come in the very near future.
I'd like to add on to pretty much the comment that Fred has brought up with really when it comes to the balance of technology and the drivers. And I think what we have seen, especially in the video market, is, we sort of relate drivers to professional athletes or professional drivers. And what do your professional drivers do? They're honing their craft every day when they're out on the road, no different than a professional athlete. So there's a ton of technology out there to help these professional athletes, your football players. But what do you see them do? They're always in there reviewing and monitoring themselves on video. With video technology, in addition to, or the solutions, but really in addition to any of the ADAS systems, it really provides a layer of how drivers can hone their craft and get better, to look at the behaviors that they're doing both positively and possibly unsafely. But it brings a whole new level, I think, to the ADAS systems themselves when it says what you can do with that technology, because at the end of the day, as Fred had indicated, that you'll have a driver. A driver is always going to be in that control. So how do you get ahead of that? How do you look at that? By all means, the video is what is going to assist you. And then, of course, you bring in the technologies of machine vision and radar and those type of technologies that will enhance that. But where does the reliance on that technology become positive or a detriment? And that's where I think when asked the question about video technology, how you can enhance your product, you really get a complete system.
Thank you. Gary?
You know, one of the common sayings that we hear from our companies that introduce technology, whether it's onboard technology or in-cab cameras or whatever the new thing is that in the initial introduction, the first thing out of the driver's mouths is, if you put that technology in my truck, I'm out of here. So knowing that there's that resistance, how carefully and creatively and sensitively a company introduces this technology is very critical. Very often they'll start with some pioneers of 2 or 3 lead drivers who then have it for 6 or 7 months and come back and report in the driver room that, you know, this is really good stuff. What you hear over time is 2 or 3 years later, after the technology is used throughout the fleet, is if you take that technology out of my truck, I'm out of here. So it's a very interesting, but it's not automatic, and it really goes to the coaching and the way it's introduced, where the driver can see that it's to their advantage to have this technology. Take cameras, for example. One of our companies has been using in-cab cameras for 2 years. Sitting across the table, we said, can you anecdotally tell us what you've learned and what's the ROI on this new technology? They have other active safety technologies as well. Well, what we found, as they said, is that 60% of the triggered videos are the result of the driver following too close. And I said, well, that's great information to know because it's good feedback for the driver, right? They said, yes, but it also makes a good ROI for investing in collision avoidance technology.
I'm gonna take one quick. I see a lot of cards up, but I had a provocative question mentioned by Uri. We all can agree that the ADAS technologies, the forward collision technologies, can be a safety to companies. Do we all agree? Just a show of hands. Yeah, I think that's good. That's good to know. Note that, someone. It was unanimous. But anyway, let me get, I have one over here. Yes, Eric.
Okay. So that was actually a great segue because I wanted to make a comment about the research. So I agree with some of the previous comments that there's not a single number for effectiveness. And a big part of that is, as you said, the different fleets, different scenarios, and so forth. But another big part of that is exactly what we've been talking about, is the development of the technology. So as we found by doing strong studies on ADAS in passenger vehicles, you don't just find a vehicle that has forward collision warning, do a study and say this is the single number. We keep studying different systems as they evolve. One thing with trucks I would like to point out is we have not yet been able to do as strong a study of ADAS in trucks as we have been able to do for passenger vehicles. There's no reason to believe that they won't work because these are the similar type of functionalities as passenger vehicles. So that's something we're interested in pursuing. When companies talk about ROI and things like that, it really helps to have a strong number to put behind that. Even if the number varies a little bit, at least there is a number as a starting point.
Great. Tim?
Oh, you want me to get first?
You were up first.
Oh, okay. No, you were. No, it's extremely important. Obviously, we've got a lot of work to do. The good thing is that these systems are available today, and there's been a lot of hard work done on them by various companies and also our suppliers. The key is when we start developing these type of systems, we have to make sure that we have the drivers and the owners involved and all collaborate as we work through these. The good thing is we're doing that much better than we used to. We have this, for example. This is excellent. We're talking about these type things, but understanding how the driver interacts with the system is extremely important. The research you talk about, extremely important. Having workshops where our drivers come in and they set in and they give real feedback, real time. So, these technologies are now much more advanced. So, we can, the good thing is, as we're moving toward automation, more automation, we can use these technologies today to make a real, benefit for our drivers, the public, and all those that share the road with our vehicles. So, extremely important, and it's good to see that we're now to a point where we can start making some real good decisions, hard decisions moving forward.
Jim?
I wanted to, I've had my card up for a while because a point several minutes ago caught my attention, but we started the discussion talking about Eaton's VORAD system. Back then I had some experience with VORAD when it first came out, and I would say that if that system was mandated then, we wouldn't be having this discussion today because the industry would have flatly rejected any sort of advanced safety or driver assistance system like VORAD. Now, I don't mean to cast any aspersions on VORAD. Eaton was way ahead of its time, but the system simply didn't work. It was too sensitive to false alarms and what have you. It was a good idea, but not quite ready for prime time. Tim just mentioned disc brakes. Another fantastic safety technology that the industry's lukewarm on at this point for a couple of reasons. Cost and weight are sort of there at the table, although not much of a factor anymore. But fleets have long memories. And when air disc brakes made an appearance about 20 years ago, fleets invested in it, and they found in short notice that that was money not well spent. I would also bring up an event that happened back in the 70s that many people probably don't even know about or have forgotten, was the original ABS brake mandate, that it actually took a lawsuit from industry to get repealed so that we would no longer have to comply with that. All that to say is that mandates are great, and they usually accomplish what they set out to do, provided the technology is up to the challenge and industry is willing to accept it. We have a mandate coming into effect next month, I believe it is, with the stability control system. I think that technology is ready for prime time, and I really can't wait till it becomes mandated. We're doing the same thing in Canada as well, a good thing, but there is a number of things that I think that could be on the mandate plate that I would, at this stage of the game anyway, urge some caution before we jump right in and start moving forward on those. There's still some unproven technologies.
Great, and I'd love to hear about it when we get to the third session. Tim? Oh, I'm sorry, Richie. Richie.
Okay, well, I might throw off the rhythm here because I don't know, Tim, you're going to respond to that. But just a real quick thing. So for us from the Daimler side, kind of moving back to your original question, Robert, we're development of technology. So Daimler sort of position was to develop a proprietary system internally to have more of a comprehensive integrated system. So addressing that technology development side, we released our first system, Detroit Assurance 2.0 in 2015. And then we released the newest version in January 2017, 4.0. What we're seeing is a 66% take rate for the 4.0 assurance system. So it's a growth that we see that's probably going to continue. And I think we're all here for the same reasons. I'm not, necessarily putting down, or I'm just trying to explain sort of the way we approached it for developing the technology. And the other way that we also look at it is we have Mercedes-Benz vehicles. So we've looked very much so at the passenger car side, the deployment of AEB systems with the passenger side in Germany, in Europe, and also transferring that information and data knowledge across the world, and also, of course, in the United States. So I definitely agree that data is huge. I think that's one of the things that we look at nowadays is collecting this data, working with our fleets closely. They know they're our customers, they know the drivers. And then opening our own test track out in Oregon to really run these tests and really understanding performance in this extreme edge cases, as Kevin had mentioned. But I think ultimately, field data is most important, getting that information in the real world, and just explaining sort of how we approach the development issue for technology.
Great, and I know you want to respond to something. I'm going to give hang on one second, give Sean a chance, and then get back to the manufacturers here, have their things up, and I actually have something for FMCSA and NHTSA coming up too,
So Advocates takes a little bit of the other side of the flip side of that in terms of supporting a mandate and supporting regulation for these devices. We talk about return on investment. I think the 2010, $86 billion was the crash cost associated with large truck crashes. So any dent that they can do, and that's just the financial, that's not looking at the deaths that are going on, the injuries that are going on there, and the lifelong problems that happen after that. You look at the study from back in 2012, I think it was, looking at both systems from Bendix and from Meriter Wabco, and their future generation at that point, now being 5-6 years ago, almost 200 lives could be saved, almost 8,000 people being injured that could be prevented, another 6,000 crashes that could be avoided. And all of those come along with a number of benefits. So while we understand that there is a limit to the technology, and the technology is going to be improving, you have to find a point where you say, this technology does have its proven points where it works, and we need to move towards getting it into all the vehicles so we can avoid these injuries and deaths. We've seen it in Europe. Europe has already rolled out for heavy vehicles having the requirement for AEB, and we'd like to see it here. Our petition has been accepted by the NHTSA, and we're hoping that it moves forward from there.
Okay. All right. So I just want to add to Gary and Jim's point that, from a driver acceptance standpoint, right, so we've seen the same thing, like, early resistance, but it's the same drivers who have come back to us and said that, okay, I love these technologies, and, they cannot drive those trucks without them, without these systems. One of the things that we felt that changed the game, 2007, 2008 timeframe, was the Eden WARAD system was, warning only, and it integrates with the engine to do some, retarder control, so slight braking. But the key thing that got changed, the whole ADAS thing, was connecting with the actual foundation brakes, right? So the OnGuard system, which got introduced with ACC in 2007, had ACC plus connection to the braking system, so it'll slow down the engine, bring you to a gradual stop, plus if needed, it'll apply some amount of brakes to the braking system. So that's more intervention, right? It's more safety for them. And one of the things, as a developer of the systems, I work on the control side as well, right? So I have a CDL as well, so I pay more close attention to when I get the warning, right? So it's easy to, detect something, apply brakes, and make sure that we stop 100 feet away from it. So there's a good chance that we will not hit it at all. But these are all level 1 driver assist systems. So we need to make sure that the driver still has control and he has all the time to react. I mean, everybody has a different driving style, right? So these technologies today is not yet connected with the site sensing things. Some advanced concepts are available, but it's not holistic yet. That's where everybody's going towards. So we have to tune the warning time. We have to wait for the right time. So that's why the drivers get a different perception when they drive. Oh, it's reacting too late for this thing. But that's the design of it. So as we talk to them, as we do more ride and drive events, they understand how the system is designed, and the acceptance rate of that system afterwards is much higher. And we have several fleets who are reordering the same systems again and again, and the take rate has been really high.
Right.
So I wanted to touch on a couple of things. First of all, Eric, in terms of a number, Ananda has numbers like this, but one that always sticks in my mind is that we had a fleet come out, one of the major fleets in the country, visit Bendix, and they were talking about the collision mitigation technology, and their comment was 70-70. They saw a 70% reduction in the number of rear-end collisions they were having, and they saw a 70% reduction in the severity of the remaining 30%. Now, I know Meritor Wabco has an up to 86%. We've got another fleet that had a 90%, again, depending on the situation. But, Robert, I wanted to touch on the benefit in terms of the number and getting the systems out there in terms of retrofit. And this is where one of the things that comes into play in terms of retrofit, these technologies today, a number of them, especially the ones that integrate with the braking system, typically have to be purchased on a new vehicle, okay? And a number of OEMs do make these technologies standard or optional from that perspective. But when we look down the road, as Ananda mentioned and as I had talked about, the foundation that we're really looking at building these on is ABS and stability, and really in terms of the full stability, electronic stability control. So getting a foundation of electronic stability control on vehicles out there today helps ensure that we're able to retrofit collision mitigation technologies at some point in the future. Now, Jim mentioned the FMVSS 136, the stability mandate, which does start taking effect August 1st. But what folks may not realize is that NHTSA in their recent budget submission actually put this mandate up as a potential mandate to get rid of, because they put it up in response to the administration's 2-for-1 requirement. Now, if that mandate goes away in order to satisfy the particular necessity of our current administration to reduce regulations, and don't get me wrong, there are regulations that we should get rid of, but this is one that you really have to take a look at, because not only does it help deliver safety, as a number of fleets can probably attest to that are here and outside, but it does become that foundation for getting these advanced safety technologies retrofitted in the future. And so I think it's important that we keep that in mind, that this is one of those mandates that the government put out that actually, and to Jim's comment, this is a proven technology. It's been out since 2004, 2005. It does work, it does deliver. Getting rid of this is going to be a mistake for today and tomorrow. So I hope there's reconsideration on that.
All right, Uri, I'll get to you in a second. I just want to show the audience I have an audience participation question that I'm going to read, mostly because it segued quite nicely. Again, with regard to regulations, NHTSA, FMCSA, Federal Highway, we do our rulemaking, and that is, for our rules, that's all our regulation we do, and that is hard enough for us to get that one thing out. I share their pain, and they've got a lot of great safety ideas and a lot of great hurdles. But the question I got from the CVSA is, when they go out there and they look at these ABS systems, 10% of them aren't hooked up correctly, are disengaged, aren't being maintained. And one of the things that we were very careful about when we made our recommendations for heavy vehicle emergency braking was the importance of stability control, because we don't want people braking and wrecking their truck instead of avoiding accident, creating a new type of accident. What do you have to say about that?
In terms of,
or maybe I can ask one of the fleet owners too, of how do you deal with, if a vehicle's not properly maintained with regard to its ABS system, it's just brake ABS system, aren't we introducing some potential trouble by having a system that's going to activate brakes?
Yeah, I think several topics or pieces of information here from the insurance perspective. First of all, it was good to hear you mention frequency and severity. Frequency in the insurance world is the number of accidents and the types of accidents. Severity is the cost of those accidents. And in commercial automobile insurance, the types of claims are often different for frequency and severity. But very important, I think we can, from an insurance perspective and return on investment, recognize that there is clearly a reduction in a number of factors. The first factor is if you reduce the frequency of claims, the number of claims, it is likely you can reduce some of the severity. and the cost of those claims. And return on investment is not always dollars. If you can reduce the number of fatalities, it's obviously an important issue. A larger issue in the cost of insurance and the cost of injury is to people who are passengers or pedestrians or in other vehicles, are people who are injured but not fatalities. We can look at fatalities as a hardline number of events and reductions, but it's injuries that we spend the most money on. Repairing people is much more expensive than repairing vehicles. So when return on investment on any technology is to look not only at the frequency and severity, but also the ability to reduce injuries and fatalities, of course. The other side of this is that when, to your point, when a system is not maintained or is not working properly, it actually increases the risk. So if you have that crash and you have certain technology and that technology is not maintained properly or not being managed properly or the driver's not trained properly or a variety of factors, it actually could contribute to a higher risk of exposure for that particular claim. So when you think about return on investment, clearly cameras, all of the types of technology we're talking about, we have seen at Lancer Insurance Company, we are certainly not the largest insurance company in the commercial side, but we are a player in all of these markets. We have seen a reduction in costs. There's also reductions for deductible costs. Companies may be self-insured. They may be involved in other kinds of group insurance programs, not insurance company based. The amount of money spent on the claim, as that goes down, because there's a reduction in the frequency, reduction in the severity, that is return on investment. So when you look at a return on investment, I think you have to look at 5 or 6 other elements other than just hard costs and a reduction in accidents. It's types of accidents, types of injuries, and then look at the other side, which is the increased exposure when the system doesn't work, or the system is not properly maintained, or the driver is not properly trained to manage the system.
Uri?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, regarding regulation, I know that we have a topic later on about regulation, so I have a lot to say about that. But just to mention one thing, mandating, which we support, ADAS mandating, is just one tool in the regulatory toolbox. There are many other ways to incentivize and to promote the use of ADAS, which we also see these cases in other countries in the world. Second thing, again, I know that we're also going to have another topic about education and driver acceptance, so I also have a lot to say about that. But just one thing, an important thing when we come to driver education is also not to just explain what is the technology, but also what it is not. So the ADAS is not a surveillance camera which is supposed to monitor the driver directly, and it's definitely not it's not intended to replace the driver. And I know that there are many people who say that there are objections from driver, but for Mobileye, at least from our experience, I would say that driver objection is much less than what you might think about. We, for example, just a few months ago, we finished retrofitting a fleet of about 4,500 vehicles, thousands of drivers, and we saw less than 1 dozen of tampering cases. So I wouldn't say that 0.3% is really a lot of driver objection out of that. Usually when we see that, usually when we see cases of tampering or driver objecting to this technology, it's usually because our sales team or the management didn't really convey what's the objective of the technology.
Okay. Great. I'm entering the lightning round of questions because I'm down to about 10 minutes, I would say. But I did want to give FMCSA and NHTSA a chance because I actually think they've done a very good job with regard to research on heavy vehicle and collision avoidance. I know tree work that was done, and certainly some funded work for Conway. Could you either of you comment on that?
I
I guess first I should start out saying, acknowledging, what Sean had mentioned earlier, and that is, that NHTSA has been petitioned, to look into the, cost benefit of forward collision warning and AEB, and we've responded positively to that. And so we're going about that work as we speak. I think over the past decade or so, but really focusing on the past 5 years, my group, our office, has worked with many of the folks in this room in a lot of really large programs to really unearth everything from driver acceptance issues to performance to testing and unintended consequences. So we're continuing to gather data. I think it was mentioned we recently completed 150 vehicle field operational tests. That was really the largest field operational test to date to try and separate sort of, innuendo from fact and anecdotal data from really statistical data. We were really encouraged by that study. So we've launched a second phase, another 150 vehicles that are going to employ the technology from really 3 different large, brake system suppliers, AEB suppliers. So we're really grateful for their involvement. And we continue to try and refine test procedures, which, at the end of the day are, really how we will determine, pass-fail criteria, should a regulation ever be forthcoming. So at this point, I guess all I can say is we're continuing to study it. The results so far are encouraging. We think it is important to get that real-world experience under our belt with the very latest generation systems. So, for example, even in this 150 vehicle fleet that we just finished, the systems have, and this is a good thing, not a bad thing, the technology has already changed. It's already gotten better. So we want to make sure we, have the very latest and best information.
I just want to get credit for all the work you all are doing in that area. I'm going to ask one question, and this is for you also, but also just for the room. We talked already about ABS systems that aren't properly maintained. The other is the importance of brake adjustment. So if you could talk about what your question was first, but also maybe touch on that.
On brake adjustment?
Yeah, brake adjustments for your systems to actually properly work.
Okay, don't adjust automatic slack adjusters. We'll start with that.
Thank you. We agree with you on that.
Work our way up. No, it's extremely important to to maintain the brakes, and we were having some conversations. Me and one of our colleagues here was having some conversations. We could put the best systems on it in the world, but if the brakes are not working correctly because they haven't changed the shoes or the linings, whatever you want to call it, that becomes a problem. So air dryer, air cleanliness, just doing your maintenance, changing out cartridges and so forth, to keep from systems freezing and so forth. But yeah, it's you still have to go back. It's a mechanical system as far as the brakes. It's an air mechanical system. So extremely important to maintain those. And in most cases, the vehicles are well maintained. But there are some exceptions, unfortunately, and it presents risk to the public. And so, what we do is we try to encourage the correct maintenance, and also I'll give a shout out to the CVSA here. Those guys working with them at the CVSA to look at maintaining these vehicles correctly. So extremely important.
Ananda?
I just wanted to add that the potential of driver assistance systems to go to higher level of automation, is based on these ABS things, right? So the brake safety day inspection data says 8% of trucks had brake violation and 15% of trailers had ABS violations, right? And part of the reason that what we have is as a collision mitigation system is because of that. If we know that we have a stable tractor and a stable trailer, a good combination, we can request higher level of braking, right? So, and there are still trailers out there with no ABS, you know. So we need to make sure as a combination it's stable when we go ahead with these braking functions. So again, I just want to emphasize on the fact that this foundation, if fixed, it'll help improve these ADAS technologies much quicker and faster. You know, we've seen the trend like take 80 years to get to this level, but with a good foundation, we can proceed much faster to the higher level of automation.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, you know, having the system reliable, you know, we talked about disc brakes and ABS when those first come out. You know, just forcing it out there is not going to do it. We have to make sure we have our ducks in a row. One thing that I think also is extremely important is having diagnostics on these systems. And I know there's been a lot of work done to make sure that the driver gets notified or warning if the system is not functioning correctly or is not functioning, because that's important as well, so that we can, you know, get the vehicles in and get them repaired and learn from that as well if need be. But extremely important to monitor, you know, the system, have diagnostics to where it reports back. But you know, that's why we try to be very careful when we move forward. We spend a lot of time, as Richie had said here, with integration and working through a robust development program.
Thomas?
Sure. Rob, I just wanted to amplify on the good work that NHTSA had done in researching the automated emergency braking. You know, we started the discussion with Eaton Vorad, and I can tell you, if there's any doubt whether the current collision mitigation systems or AEBs are related to the spotty performance, Eaton Vorad, I can tell you they certainly aren't. At Schneider, we don't necessarily wait for a regulation. If we see something that's right, we move towards it. We do it with or without a regulation, because we know it's right for safety. We know it's right for the business. Folks often tease us at Schneider. You know, most people measure twice, you cut once. We measure 22 times, and maybe we cut, maybe we don't cut. I can tell you, with Eaton Vorad back in the late 90s, we heard how good it was, and we piloted it, and we did it 3 different times, and we never saw the benefit. I will tell you, with the emergency, the automated emergency braking, very different. Again, we did significant pilots. We work with our friends at WABCO, with Bendix. We work with Detroit Assurance. We have them on all of our fleet. We moved to that 5 years ago. We have 12,000 trucks with them, with the system in place. And just as a colleague from Bendix mentioned, we have seen a 69% reduction in frequency, which I know as we got the insurance tie between frequency and severity, and a 95% reduction in severity, which means that when the crash does occur, it is very less in terms of severity, which I think everyone can understand. So I just wanted to address the fact that while research is going on, and I think Eric mentioned is there even data out there to study, we have our own data. We have worked towards it. It is the right thing to do. It's highly effective, and there should be no doubt that this is ready for prime time. And in fact, again, over 5 years, and we travel over 1 billion miles every year in North America, we've seen great success with it. So again, just to highlight the work and the research that's already been done in this space.
Tim?
Yeah, just real quick, that's a good segue into what I wanted to say. You know, with these type of technologies, I applaud Schneider for taking those actions. But anyway, one thing I wanted to bring forward is, you know, it's up to manufacturers and all of us to do our part. One thing Volvo's doing, for example, is electronic stability control. I think we were the first to make it standard back in 2006. So taking a leadership role, I can say today, I don't know if you saw the press release, but with our highway tractors, we're making our Volvo Active Driver Assist that has automatic emergency braking as standard. So we're making it standard on our highway tractors. Now, vocational, we've got some work to do and some additional discussions on that. But you know, serving as a leader in safety, we're going to take the first step.
Richie, I gave you a question in advance. I don't know, what was it, a couple minutes? So you're probably deep prepared answer. But the question that came from the crowd was comparing ADAS systems in passenger vehicles versus heavy vehicles? Because on some levels, we're out there picking cars today that have these systems all on board, and you're not hearing some of the same difficulties. I'll make it easy for you. Is it much more complicated to put an ADAS system in a truck?
Well, I think the one thing is, maybe I can answer the question, whoever asked it, because I don't want to throw off the rhythm here.
You could have just said yes.
Well, okay, typically what happens for us, Daimler, passenger vehicles are more advanced than the truck side. So it's probably like 2-3 years out, they get technologies before we do. And for example, stereoscopic vision, cameras like that, passenger vehicle side already has that. Intelligent headlighting, they already have that. And these are things that are coming to the trucks later on. And I think with trucks, you have a lot of complexity with the fleets and the sort of the different variations, the customization that happens with it as well. So there are different challenges for sure, mounting the radar systems, having aftermarket like shovels, things like that mounted in front of the trucks, which could totally degrade the performance of these systems. So these are things that the truck side has to worry about that the car side doesn't, for sure. So yes, there are differences, but we heavily rely both on the truck and the car side together. Daimler's sort of a one-unit company where we pull the technology from the car side and vice versa. But the radar systems that we have come from Mercedes-Benz.
I'm almost out of time. I'm on borrowed time, but I'm going to ask for just a little indulgence. So be very quick, Eric.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't doubt that there's a lot of data out there, but there's a little difference between data and study design. But the important thing to us is that, think successes like you've observed is almost 70% reduction. Publish that, put it out there. We would really love to see things like that. And, in a positive way, critique it and figure out what kind of questions that does and does not answer. We think there's great promise, and we just want to quantify that.
And I know one trucking company has partnered with or Insurance Institute partnered in North Carolina on some truck technology, or truck scores, actually, rating scores. So partnerships are very important, engaging with each other. Let me go Adam first.
Thank you. I just have a couple comments. The first is, and Gary knows this, is as a private fleet, there is no one more motivated to be safe than a private fleet operator, because your business is always at risk, okay? So we have a different motivation than anyone else out there. And to put it in perspective, I want to talk just briefly about our performance over the last, I'll say, decade. So 21 years in business, okay? Our average cost for ALGL, auto liability, general liability, as a percentage of revenue, for every $100 of revenue, was about 21 cents on every $100. So all of my motor and carry public would jump up and down, be excited about that. 21 cents on $100 is unheard of, okay? Over the last 10 years, we've dropped it down to 7 cents per $100 in revenue as we've adopted all of the great technology that's out there. And so as a case in point, to talk about the technology that works, this isn't the Eaton-Vorad system that doesn't work. The technology works, the return on investment is there, and the only thing that's holding companies back from doing it is some understanding of that risk and that cost, but more importantly, or just as importantly, is the safety culture within those companies. And I think both of those needs to be looked at.
I agree with that. No, I'm sorry, I don't. I'm a facilitator. I don't agree.
No, I was just going to make a comment about it's extremely important, like you said, to share, what is the return on investment and so forth. And, we see a lot of times now we have our customers coming forward and telling us that, this really made a difference. You can think of these situations where, a truck or even a car is operating in a bad fog bank. You run into potentially, and you start getting warnings and so forth. It's, again, this is one of those technologies that we can pull information right now and share with others, and that's what we need to try to do is to share, how it can be used and the benefits to it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the first session. We're getting ready to take a break. Again, just for people out here in the audience, 100% people agree, benefits here. People also say the base systems have to be working for the benefits to be achieved. The research needs to be sound. Our regulatory partners, hands cuffed. But I'm glad they're doing the work they're doing. And we're going to have some discussion next time I'm up. Alex is going to take the next one on driver training. When I'm up, we're going to talk about the magic of regulation versus voluntary compliance. I work in a place where aviation unfortunately exists, where a lot of people will tell you that they voluntarily complied with everything and they've never been regulated in their lives. Not completely true, but there are a lot of emphasis on voluntary programs. So thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Rob teased you with a break. It's not going to happen for 45 more minutes.
Break.
But, what I heard so far was there's got to be cooperation. There's a lot of education that has to happen, both in talking about the benefits. We have to share the benefits. We have to talk about how this is working. There's a lot of very enlightened people in this room and in the audience. But there are lots and lots of operators and vehicles on the road that are not sold yet. So as we talk about education, I look essentially at three audiences. And we've kind of artificially broken the day up into these groups. We know there's overlap, okay? So don't worry about going back to something that you want to comment on or going ahead, because we've already gone back and ahead several times. So just feel free to go at it. But we're talking about how do we let the industry know about all the benefits and to try to get a stronger adoption of ADAS systems. How do we let drivers know that these are assistance systems? This is not high levels of automation. This is something to help you get home to your family. This is a safety thing that the company is going to install for you because they care about you and are going to get you home. And how do we let the drivers know what are the limitations of these systems? I'm guessing, I'm mostly involved in passenger car ADAS systems, and I know that the jungle of operational domains, of names, of parameters, of where this stuff works is confusing to people that are deeply in the systems. It varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, from trim level to trim level, from year to year. I'm guessing, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that there is not standardization in the trucking industry, and that there are variations in the systems that you guys offer and other folks offer. So where does the education to the driver lie? Does it lie with the manufacturer? Does it lie with the fleet operator? Does it lie with a dealer, somebody who sells this stuff? Where does that primary education responsibility lie? Or does it lie any? Are these things so intuitive that all the driver has to do is get in the car, get in the cab, and he knows how to run it? So there's that. And then the final thing that I'd like to touch on, if we can, is education of passenger car drivers on the road with vehicles that are equipped with these systems. Somebody mentioned that the operating characteristics of these systems are different than if you were driving. They react much quicker. So in National Safety Council, for instance, in passenger cars, we advocate a 3-second following distance, right? 3 seconds was our standard. You need that amount of time to react. Well, the systems, the ADAS systems, react a lot faster. If you want to set the gap on adaptive cruise control, you're hard-pressed to find any manufacturer that offers a 3-second following distance. They're all a lot closer. Why? Because people will jump in front of you on the road today if you're 3 seconds behind. And so I know that in the trucking industry, since brakes work faster in automation, the following distance may seem scary to drivers. Or what about platooning, for instance? When you guys start platooning, what is the driver of a passenger car going to know or not know about whether or not they can break into a truck train? which is going to be happening pretty soon. So discuss amongst yourselves. No, just kidding. Sean?
So, at least in terms of commercial vehicles, we see a unique opportunity because you have, for lack of a better term, a captive audience. The drivers should be getting trained before they get behind the wheel. Advocates was part of the negotiated rulemaking on entry-level driver training and trying to push for behind-the-wheel hours, making sure that the drivers are getting a chance to actually be behind the wheel and get their driver training. We see that also as an opportunity to introduce them to hopefully standardized systems such as AEB, and making sure they understand what the benefits are to them and also what the limitations of those systems are. The second part of that is especially looking at the difference between commercial vehicles where you have a professional group that is getting training. You have, for passenger vehicles, you have a group that doesn't get any training. And we look at the systems as requiring what we've been looking at as functional safety. Is you need to design the system to deal with what you believe are going to be misuses, what you believe are going to be errors committed by your drivers, and figuring out how do I keep those drivers aware of what's going on with the system. If I know that a system is going to encourage somebody to, say, fall asleep behind the wheel at 70 miles an hour for 6.5 minutes, I probably should find a way to stop that from happening, especially if I dictate that the system requires an alert driver. We look at that for the other systems and say, you need to design your system so that you're predicting what people are going to do. And there's plenty of research out there, and we talked about human factors research before. We know what we do as human beings when we're behind the wheel. We know what our faults are, and we need to address those in the technology. The hierarchy of safety says the first thing you do is eliminate the hazard. If you can't eliminate it, then you try and mitigate the hazard. If you can't mitigate the hazard, only then do you start getting down to lower levels and say, here's a warning. Don't try and use this thing this way. But that should be the last line of defense.
Thank you. Tom?
Sure. I'll try to hit just very briefly a couple of the questions that you mentioned. I think from an industry perspective, the question is, how do we make sure others are aware of automated emergency braking or other ADAS technologies? From a large carrier perspective, certainly we are well aware, as my colleagues in the audience from J.B. Hunt and from Knight Swift, we are aware from our OEMs, from our technology providers, but I think there's a large portion of the fleet, whether it's smaller fleets or owner-operators or secondary market purchasers, that aren't aware of the technology, and there needs to be more. I think the question was posed, how does the word get out there? Is it through dealers? Is it through government? I think the answer is yes. The word needs to be out there. We spend a lot of time working with folks that ask for either assistance or insight as to what we do from a safety perspective. And more times than not, we'll work with smaller fleets, maybe in excess of 400 trucks or so. They will have a fleet completely outfitted with automated transmissions, which is great, but they've never heard of automated emergency braking. It's quite a concept to them. So I think there's a general industry awareness that needs to take place for folks to realize what it is. I think from the driver perspective, and the question was around, how do you educate your drivers? Absolutely. It can't just be, here's the truck and go. There needs to be a degree of education that makes it very clear to the driver associate what is it and what isn't it. Because the drivers today, there's a lot of technology in the truck, and they will confuse different systems. They will confuse different alerts with various systems. So this is not predictive cruise control. This is not lane departure warning. This is not a forward-facing camera. This is an automated emergency braking system. Here's the visual, the audio, and the haptic alerts that you're going to get, and here's what the system's going to do. There needs to be that understanding. We take great pride in putting training of our drivers in truck as well as over the road, and we'll even have reinforcement training on computer-based training. They've got to understand it if they're going to embrace it. And then I think the question is how do you make sure they don't overly rely on it, which a great question. If they understand what it does and what it doesn't do, they will not. And I would just like to pick up on a comment that my colleague from Sentinel said, to really reinforce this with your fleet so that they don't feel I want to defeat it or I want to turn it off, there has to be top-down safety support. There has to be a culture of safety so that everyone that's talking to the driver associate from the CEO to the fleet manager, understands what the system is, how it works, why it's important, so that when somebody says, yeah, this really causes me to adjust my driving behavior, I'm not sure I like it, they can express the favorable benefits that you see in highway safety. When you talk to drivers about the results, they get it, because they see the alerts, they see the warnings, and they can see why it's creating a benefit. So again, just to try to hit the three questions there.
Thank you. Kelly?
Thank you. Yeah, we definitely support early education and training, especially with our entry-level driver training rule out there. We need to, or at least I'd like to put some perspective on the industry. We regulate over 500,000 carriers. 80% of those carriers are small owner and operators. And within the industry, there's a large turnover of drivers. So I think this area is ripe for looking for creative ideas and opportunities on how you do continuous training, initial training and continuous training of this type of population.
Jim?
An interesting discussion here. I'm plotting a few things to say. One of the challenges with driver training in this environment, this ongoing environment as technology progresses, is any given fleet today, especially the larger ones, are going to have trucks ranging from 2 weeks to 5 years old. And the technology across those different ages and vintages of trucks is going to be different. Technology will behave differently, even though the system is called something similar, and a 5-year-old truck is a 6-week-old truck. Drivers and fleets need to make a big effort to stay on top of what this technology does. And expanding on that a little bit, and I've had this experience in the last couple of years myself, I test drive a lot of trucks for our magazine. I'll go out and drive it around for a day or two and then write a report on what I think of it. And what I'm finding now is that there are diverging bits of technology in trucks that one manufacturer calls and displays A, and the next manufacturer calls and displays it B. They do essentially the same function, but there's different ways of displaying that information to the driver and different alerts that the driver is going to get. So if you're in a fleet situation as a driver where you're driving one truck on Monday, a different truck on Tuesday, and a third truck again on Wednesday or for the rest of the week, keeping up with that technology can be tough. Now, if you go back to the driving schools, and I'm not defending them, but they're teaching people how to drive, even with the entry-level driver mandate coming out, with 20-year-old technology. The trucks that they're using in the driving schools, God bless them, are at least 10 years old. They don't even have DPFs on them, a lot of them. So you can't expect the driving schools to pick up the mantle and say, we're going to teach these students all about advanced driver assistance systems in a truck that still has a manual transmission. We aren't there yet. So the industry and the carrier population, I think, have a role here in getting that information down to the driver level so that they can start to respond to it. And as my colleague from FMCSA said, of the 500,000 carriers that agency regulates, the vast majority of them are 10 or 12 trucks or less. So how do you shove a training program into a carrier that size who may or may not even think of themselves as a motor carrier? They haul logs back and forth from the forest to the paper mill. They are, in fact, carriers, and they are regulated, but they don't see themselves as truckers. They see themselves as loggers. So we're reaching across industries now and trying to get this information down to that group. It's tough.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, picking up on that with the variation in the size of carriers, the larger fleets, in terms of getting the information out to get more fleets interested in purchasing it, the larger fleets have probably a different relationship with the manufacturers and the salespeople in terms of bringing the technology to them. They have the capability of running pilot tests to see how it works, maybe running multiple pilot tests, as we've heard. And so smaller carriers don't quite have that same opportunity. They have much fewer trucks and can't be, spending that time on that. And so they do need to see, it comes back to getting that data and the information out, because they don't have the experience to know. They've heard of bad experiences on some early technologies and still have that in their mind, and so they're waiting till they get some certainty that this new technology is going to be a good investment and not something that causes more problems in terms of maintenance and operation.
So how do we share best practices, I guess, is the...
Well, I mean, we try to do it within our association through our meetings and through the Technology Maintenance Council. There's events like this fleet conference that we're part of here. So there's some ways to do it. Again, it's also getting the information out through publishing studies, whether it's IHS, whether it's fleet sharing it, and maybe putting it out in publications as well.
Ananda?
Just comment here. For fellow CDL drivers, right? So if a truck has a AEB system, it's easy to identify. Most of the OEMs have implemented that in their startup screens. So as you start the truck, it just pops up and says, collision mitigation system enabled. Or you have the other display units from the suppliers telling the drivers that this truck has a collision mitigation system. And one of the thing, not sure how to implement this, but what we have to try is to differentiate between the ACC and the AEB behavior, right? So the AEB is an always on. That's your, advanced emergency braking. That is what is going to help you prevent from all this crash. ACC is more of a convenient and, feature. So it's adaptive cruise control. It does do the same amount of, it does do the active braking, but not to that level, right? So it's just helping you drive normally. Some of the things that we have heard from the drivers are, I was driving, I was doing this cruise control and the brakes just came on. That's because the car in front of you slowed down, or somebody just got in front of you to take the car. That's not the AEB event. So with the help of our ProView product, which is what we work together with Smart Drive, we are able to show the video to the drivers to explain to them that this is not your fault, this is not system's fault, it's the environment, right?
So let me ask you a question about, you activate the system and it says it's enabled. Does the driver get any kind of information about what the operational parameters of that system are? Like, this AEB is enabled, but it works on the highway. Don't try this in stop and go traffic, or whatever. Or just say, hi, we're here.
Systems are designed to, at least in today's products, it's designed to work above 15 miles an hour, right? So it's not necessarily for stop and go. It doesn't go yet. It can stop. But it works above 15 miles an hour. So it's meant for highway. It's meant for city traffic speeds at slower things.
So let me add a little bit to what Ananda's saying. Ananda's absolutely right. The system starts up. But before the driver even gets in the truck to drive the system, they need to have some training about what the system is. And so WABCO, Meritor WABCO, and Bendix, we all provide a variety of information. And I'll take you through what we do. Obviously, there's an operator's manual, but how many people read their operator's manual for their car? Right? Mine was this thick. Yeah, Sean, you would, of course. But all the rest of us who have them this thick don't typically look at them. But so to help that along, we do put together driving with videos, and we've done this since the start of stability. And these videos, in fact, as a CDL holder myself, I actually drive some of the videos to show the drivers exactly what goes on in the truck when they get these different alerts. And we do these videos for each of the OEMs. So if you buy a Volvo or you buy another OEM make, that video meets, addresses theirs. And we make these available to, they're free. You can go to our YouTube site. You can download them. And we also do the other thing we do, which we think is very important. We do a lot of demos, as does Ananda and his team. But the demos aren't just about selling the technology. The demos are often about fleets who have the technology bringing their drivers out to the demo so they can experience what the technology is. And the last thing that I'll say is it is always extremely important the drivers realize that there is an upper end to these technologies. Okay, there is a limit. I remember when stability first came out, there were fleets who didn't train their drivers about stability. And so what happened? Drivers suddenly realized that, hey, I have a technology that lets me go around turns faster. That wasn't the idea, and some of them found out the hard way that there was an upper limit. So it is important for the driver to remember these are there to back them up. And these are the things that we do talk about and cover in terms of our training. And there was just one last thing I wanted to say. You mentioned earlier about adaptive cruise control. Ananda, I think your systems are still this way. We do, it's a 2.8 to 3.5 second following gap, and that's probably not going to change anytime soon because 80,000 pounds does not stop like a $4,000 car does. And so you're going to want to maintain some following distance. And Smith Systems recommend 7 seconds, so if you want to really talk about cars cutting in front of you, try to maintain that 7 seconds. But that's where we are in terms of that.
Thank you. Kevin, did you want to say something?
Sure. So this might be a good place to interject a little bit about the research we do and what drivers experience. There's kind of two facets to training. One is how the systems work, how they're intended to work, and how they're meant to help the driver. But it's also going to be a little different when they get out there and actually experience the systems themselves. So Bob alluded to the study that we did with NHTSA. There's 150 trucks all across the country, and we collected about 3 million miles of data, and that's why I kind of stayed quiet during the safety benefits discussions. That's a drop in the pond when it comes to the amount of trucking that goes on. So the fleets are a very good source of data for that. But we put cameras in trucks just to see what drivers experienced. And I do want to caveat that this is what I would consider the previous generation of the technology. All the companies that supply this have new systems that are out now. And to a large degree, they do try to address these issues. But false activations do occur. There's no training on what to do if you get a false activation. Both from a fleet perspective, do you report this to your safety manager, or is this going to be something that's monitored by your fleet safety manager? And he's going to come back and ask you what happened. And that's not really something the driver's equipped to explain. Some types of alerts are also very frequent. These systems are designed, like you said, 3 seconds of following distance. Drivers get a lot of audio-visual feedback at 3 seconds of following distance, especially when there's traffic around. So just because from a fleet safety manager perspective, they may say, I want my driver to receive all that feedback if he's ever within 3 seconds. But from a driver's perspective, they may say, I'm in control of my vehicle. I know what's going on. That car cut in front of me. What am I supposed to do in 5 o'clock traffic? So there is kind of two aspects to training. One is make sure they understand what the system is intended to do, how it can assist them, and how it intervenes, but also how you should interact in a day-to-day basis with the system. And in particular, that just because you got feedback from the system, it's not telling you did something wrong, which is a perception I've seen with some of the drivers I've talked to, that any feedback whatsoever means that the system is telling them they didn't do something correctly, which is just not the case.
I know there are a number of people that have wanted to speak. I want to ask Kevin Lewis from AMVA a question, and that is that your organization also encompasses law enforcement. So what are the educational requirements of law enforcement as these vehicles do different things on the roads than law enforcement is used to?
That's a question that probably does not have a very good answer right now. Law enforcement, if you're talking state troopers or highway patrol, the folks that are actually charged with enforcing highway safety regulations and rules and laws in and around commercial motor vehicles, they know what to do. Your local law enforcement officers really, we try to tell them that, hey, a truck's nothing more than a big car. Enforce the actual laws and don't worry about doing a vehicle inspection. Don't ask to see the driver's logbook. Just issue the citation and let the driver go. When you start talking about the introduction of all of this new technology into the workplace, I think that you wind up with some unintended consequences for law enforcement. For example, both cars and commercial motor vehicles that have all this technology, they can stop literally very quickly on a dime. The vehicle behind that truck or that vehicle is not equipped with that technology. They're equipped with a human being behind the wheel. And that human being does not act as fast as technology goes. So now you're going to have additional rear-end collision. Now, how does law enforcement address that? Is the driver of the truck at fault? Is the driver of the vehicle at fault? Is the driver in front of the truck that caused the truck to slow down quickly at fault? And how does law enforcement handle that situation? And unfortunately, there is no good answer here. I think for every time technology moves forward, you're going to create additional circumstances where other drivers are involved with potentially another crash. So it's not the driver at fault, the truck driver at fault, it's the car driver behind that truck driver. And law enforcement is going to have to figure out how to deal with that, and that'll come through experience. I mean, you ask me this question 5 years from now, law enforcement will give you a much better answer simply because they will have seen what this technology is doing out on the road.
Thank you. Robert, before you answer this question, I want to ask you one that was phoned in from the audience here. So is liability still being worked out in the event of an issue like this? If a system fails, for instance, if there are unintended consequences, as we say?
I'll do the best I can to answer that. Liability is often in question in any motor vehicle crash. And it's very important from a perspective of understanding is to recognize that liability may have multiple factors and different interpretations and may not be decided for quite some time. So the fact of when you talk about whose fault the crash is early on, it's often very hard to do that. So liability in relation to the type of crash, what you just described, where the commercial vehicle may have all different types of equipment and advanced technology, and the technology does everything it's supposed to do, and someone crashes into the back because they have no technology. The simple thought on that is the vehicle in the rear crashed into the vehicle in the front. However, I do believe that there will be question about the technology. Did the technology work? Was it calibrated properly? Was it set properly? Were road conditions involved? Was the driver trained properly? Because in general, commercial vehicles have a larger, their type of coverage that they have and the amount of coverage that they have is larger than the pedestrian or personal vehicle. And so if there are more expensive injuries, people are looking to get paid for those injuries. Regardless of outcome of liability, you're going to go to the deeper pockets. So all of the technology helps, but becomes a portion of the assessment of liability. And liability is often not easy to determine. Okay, Can I?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I'm going to try and be practical here. And I apologize to anyone who doesn't want to be practical. But when we talk about driver training on advanced technologies or any standard types of technologies, I think we need to go back a little more to the beginning. When you talk about training, I think you're talking about driver recruiting, driver hiring, driver retention, and the driver pool in any commercial vehicle. If you don't add those into the discussions, I think you water down the aspects of training. At Lancer Insurance, we spend a good deal of time, effort, and resources, financial resources and time resources on providing driver training information, driver training programs, and a variety of technology programs. The most difficult thing we experience is getting to the driver. We can get to our policyholder, the owner, we can get to the safety directors if there is one, we can get to a variety of folks, but to get to the driver is nearly impossible. And I do want to reiterate Dr. Riegel's statement. We insure many of the smaller carriers in both passenger transportation and the trucking side. We do insure fleets, but we tend to, by definition and choice, insure smaller operators. The ability to train is critical to the outcome of all of this technology. And when you look at training programs, I agree with Adam in terms of the safety culture. It is critical, and the folks at Schneider, who we've worked with in the past, excellent commitment to safety. However, if the driver pool is limited, if the driver ability to learn is limited, then the technology may not, the training on the technology might not work. And I do want to talk just briefly about training. We look at the driver pool. We need to look at the age of drivers. We need to look at the experience of drivers. Anyone here who has trained drivers, how many of you are good at untraining bad habits in drivers? Well, getting rid of those bad habits, untraining it versus training the way you want them trained in your company or in Schneider. It's very difficult to do that. When we look at the age and experience of drivers, I think in training we need to look at how people learn, and the ability to learn for a younger person to a middle-aged person to an older person is completely different. And unless learning theory is added into any of the technology training, you may use game theory with younger people, but you may have to use hands-on training with an older person who may not be great at spending all their time playing games because it's just different generational learning techniques. So I do think that A, training's critical, B, devising methods to recognize the multiple types of training. When we're looking at technology, it's one thing, but any of the operators can tell you they have to train drivers to do 100 things. And the priority of what's most important relates to getting that load delivered or getting those passengers delivered. So the criteria for any one system or any group of systems in terms of training must be integrated into a training program, driver selection, driver hiring, and learning theory about how people you employ learn. And that takes, I think, a tremendous amount of time and money. And the other side of technology is the support piece, which is the data collection. Is it working? And how do you train for it? And that is a major financial commitment, I believe, that any transportation company has to make.
Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, so Robert, you're spot on. I was going to say earlier, in my simple term, we own the driver, plain and simple. Our success or failure is contingent upon how well that driver performs. So it starts with the recruiting, it starts with the onboarding, and it starts and certainly with the training, without question. Now, we'll rely on our partners to help us with some of the training, but certainly the accountability for that driver's performance, success, good or bad, is ultimately the fleet operator's responsibility. I'll also tell you, just as a different thought, as Robert was saying, as he was talking, it got me thinking, this technology that we're talking about, it can be your best friend or your worst enemy, okay? It has to be part of a comprehensive program, okay? And so you can equip the truck with all the greatest stuff in the world, but if you don't use it properly, it is your worst enemy. I can tell you from war stories about experience with having it on the truck and not using it and the potential liability that it creates for you. So certainly, from a performance standpoint, it's one piece. Having the technology is one piece in winning at this game of safety performance every day. And the only last thing I would tell you is that, someone asked earlier about why we're here, and obviously we want to talk about the great safety technology that's out there and be a big supporter. I can also tell you, too, over the last 3 years, we have seen a noticeable shift in adoption or acceptance of some of this technology for all our small pond that we fish in. Okay, when you look for high hazard chemical tank truck drivers, gasoline, crude oil drivers, that's a pretty small pond that we're fishing in. And the best example I can say is with our cameras. We're an early adopter of the camera system. We love forward-facing and rear-facing cameras. It's the greatest technology that we have. Okay. I will tell you, it's part of our comprehensive safety program, okay? And as more fleets get better safety performance, either they're told they have to by the regulatory bodies or the insurance agencies or what have you, it's their right to operate. As that becomes more pervasive out in the fleets, it gets easier for me to get drivers in who don't complain about all the bells and whistles that we have on their trucks. And the best example I can give you is that cameras. 3 years ago, they don't want to work for Sentinel because they have a camera looking at them. 3 years later, all of our competitors in our small pond all have cameras looking at them. So the more that it's out in industry, the better the safety performance will get for the entire industry.
Thank you. Tom?
Sure. I just wanted to comment on, again, the topic of automated emergency braking. And my only caution was, we had this, what about law enforcement and how will they investigate? And I don't want the what if to hold up the proliferation of this, because this is ready to go. And the longer that we wait, the more crashes that we will not prevent or lives that we will not save. And I think back 5 years ago when we made the decision, sure, we did a lot of testing. We had a lot of well-regarded driver associates involved that provided our fleet feedback, yet we still faced the feedback of, yeah, but, what if the trailer lights don't come on? Or what about wintertime? Aren't the truck and trailer going to jackknife? Or things that were missed that never occurred. And you're always chasing perfection, but if you wait for perfection, you'll never get there. And the results that we've seen and the results I think the industry can see if we move very quickly on this will be missed if we worry about the yeah, but or the what if. So just as a follow-up, a caution that we don't, if it's real, let's study it, let's test it, let's resolve it, but let's get the word out there. Because it's easy to drag your feet on the right decision because you're concerned about a what if.
Thank you. Tim, I made you wait so long. I think you turned your card the other way. Do you have a comment or anything that you want to say?
No, I was just going to say that I echo everything that's been said. It's very important to have good training programs, and for understand, of course, the operators or the owners have responsibility. It's our responsibility to also provide, information, good information that can be used in training packages. It's come a long way with, social media, YouTube, the internet. There's a lot of information available, and, as being a business partner with our clients and the carriers and so forth, we get out there and we work with them. I'm sure Bendix has. And WAPCO also, and Daimler, and others have their own servicing people, sales and marketing people. But it's important for us to also to get out there and firsthand talk with drivers, work with our customers, and make sure that they have the information that they need to be able to appropriately train their drivers.
Thank you.
Another thing, real quickly, I'm seeing a little bit more of is electronic owner's manuals. So we talk about owner's manuals that you used to say that, oh, I don't have the owner manuals in the truck. But now we're starting to see it's much more user-friendly. So hopefully more to come on that.
Thank you. Gary?
Adam did such a great job of really talking about the video space of this, but, I'd like to step back and just comment quickly about, when it comes to the education training process, it really is a layered process. It's like we called it peeled the onion. If you do it right, your eyes don't get burnt. So the key with really any of this layered process is really tackling those obstacles. One is always driver resistance. I remember back when we brought this huge technology into our equipment. It was called cruise control. And you'd see how many drivers would actually come in and battle that with you when you really we're talking about some of the benefits instead of seeing these, cut-off rulers shoved into the, the accelerator next to the doghouse. So it really is, you have the difference in generational. Clearly, we have technology today that even ourselves, we hand to our younger generation to take care of us for us. But it also comes down to the educational process. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and I think as adults we all understand that we visually can understand and accept something quicker versus trying to understand it by reading it. So how you approach it is something that I've seen that has just been a tremendous assistance. As Tom had said, the carriers in the group and Adam and, of course, J.B. Hunt and Knight and Swift in here and the others, they really do take that different approach to get the buy-in, what I'd say, and acceptance. And I think that is where you go back to the previous comment of the benchmarking and understanding that. There's a lot of people that have been through this that you can really, anchor off of and really learn from it. But in addition to another part of your question, it was about, really how do you educate or get the technology into the passenger vehicle as far as education. I think what you're seeing with some of these technology, there's a level of accountability Clearly, there's technology out here, video technology, one of them, that you now capture the poor behaviors of the passenger vehicles, which now are being reported and addressed by law enforcement. So when you get to exonerations and the technologies that can help, the acceptance seems to be there, because you do see a lot of drivers out there with the GoPros or their own cell phones up on the dash. Well, you understand that they're out there also to protect their own lives and protect the interests of the company.
Thank you. I know there are a lot of panelists who would like to make comments, and I'm going to ask you to hold them to Rob's session, mainly because it's break time. And before the break, I just want to do a short commercial for the Road to Zero. And I want to invite anybody up in the panel, any in the audience, to sign up for the Road to Zero if your organization is not already part of this. It's a free group to join, and our folks are outside in the lobby. We'll talk to you about the benefits and the goals. So thank you all. See you in 15 minutes.
We're now transitioning. We've done basically what it is and some of the advantages of the technology. We've talked about some of the issues with regard to making sure drivers are properly integrated into the system, and it was great to hear about the human factors in the design ahead of time instead of trying to fit a driver to a poorly designed system. Now, I want to talk about moving from a lot of vehicles having it to every vehicle having it, the technologies to avoid collisions. Right now, I'm going to jump out front real quick and ask. Do my glasses. I'm not as young as I look. Tom, what percentage of your fleet right now do you think is carrying forward collision auto braking?
It's in excess of 90% now. We started 5 years ago, so we are probably close to 92, 93%.
Great. And Adam? 95%. 95%. I'm going to talk to Fred and Ananda about what's your kind of sense of how many vehicles are being sold with the technology right now? Or actually, I can come over here to Volvo. What is your take rate in Daimler for the technology on the vehicles you're selling new?
Yeah, I think we're about 35% at this point.
So in 2015, we're at 30%, and 2017 is now 66%.
Up to 66%.
Right.
That is great.
Right.
So one of the positive things, I think, is we're moving in the right direction. One of the difficult things is, I hate to say it, the companies we have here are some of the safest companies. You know, I don't mean that in a bad way. Obviously, being safe is good. You're adopting the technology. Unfortunately, you're probably the companies that need it less because you've got a lot of other safety programs and a good safety culture. You know, and I'm not doing this because I own stock in either Bendix or WABCO or any others, because I'm not allowed to, like my friends over here, not allowed to own any transportation interests. But I am interested in not going to these crashes. I have in the past, I'm going to ask Mike a question because he told me he was ready. And so, Mike, can you say what we've asked for in the past with regard to this technology?
Well, like it was stated earlier, we have been asking to have this technology adopted for many, many years to various agencies, to the FMCSA to do studies, to NHTSA to make it mandatory, to manufacturers to include it on their vehicles. And while that number is going up, it's still not where we would like it to be. And one of the issues for manufacturers is that, you know, some of this technology has been on the vehicles, but to get it to operate, you had to buy another package, or you had to do something over and above the initial technology. And a lot of carriers, you know, like we spoke earlier, don't see the return on investment of that. Now, is that short-sighted? Absolutely. But you know, that's one of the challenges that regulatory folks have, the industry has, and certainly the providers have, is to get people to understand that these technologies are useful and helpful if they're implemented correctly. And the board has been asking for that since late 1990s and on. And just the few accidents that I've done in my term at the board, almost all of them could have been either mitigated or eliminated had some of these technologies been on the vehicles at the time of the accident.
And I have been working with my team to try and come up with words other than require for some of these technologies, because reality requires a heavy lift. And, you know, certainly the voluntary adoption is great, but is it quick enough? Over here with Jim.
I don't want to come across as an apologist for the industry. Let me say that right off the bat. And certainly Sentinel and Schneider are two really good examples of this. But the adoption rates, from what I hear from some of my readers, are low because we've had such, in the last 10 years, a heap of regulations piled on us that have cost a great deal of money, and I'm talking mostly emission systems technology here, that the industry has seen zero, if any, return on that investment, except in the last 4 or 5 years since 2012 when some of that fuel economy started coming back. But we've been paying for these various mandates, and when a new one comes along like this safety technology, fleets are saying, do we have the money to afford this? So making that ROI case is a little bit tougher, even though it's there and any fleet who's using it could tell you it is. It's not really a no-brainer amongst some fleets.
Robert?
Yeah, so from the insurance side, as we look at technology issues, we look at the amount of time or the length of time it takes for a fleet to adapt. And the fleet can be long-haul truck, it could be local truck, it could be passenger transportation. And depending upon the industry or the niche of the industry that fleet is in, we see a range of about 5 to up to 20 years for full adaptation. And during that period of time, you have vehicles with technology, advanced technology, some with a smaller amount of technology, and some with less technology or no technology. And again, you get to the issue of drivers often moving back and forth between those vehicles and the challenges that presents. No one has mentioned this, so I'll mention it. The latest mandate is the ELD mandate. And the ELD mandate is kind of taking a lot of front and center priority for smaller fleets. Larger fleets often have had ELDs for some time, but smaller fleets have not. So that's taking some precedent, and I do think there is some potential for the joining of technology, and manufacturers may not be happy to hear this, but the need is to find some common way to have a centralized approach to using this technology successfully for driving, safer driving, better data, and better outcome for the company, kind of combining this stuff together into a platform-based approach so that the addition of technology, or whether it's voluntary or mandated, can be easier for the operator to use and apply and implement. So, and from just again, from a liability and a claims perspective, if I can tell you that when we look at the frequency of side swipes, rear ends, backing accidents, those are the highest, tend to be the highest frequencies in commercial vehicles. However, when you look at severity of the cost, you look at ran off road, you look at rear end, pedestrian hits, bicyclists, and intersection turning claims. Those are the most expensive. And historically, if you look at something as simple as cruise control, as an adaptive technology, some of our most expensive ran off road claims have been based on cruise control where the human factor of fatigue does not get added into the technology, and the driver falls asleep or dozes off. The truck continues to drive at the rate of whatever speed it's driving and drives off the road. Eventually, with the berm of the road, it's just going to drive off the road. Those are very expensive claims. So linking some of the technology to the applicability to the concept, whether it's voluntary or mandated, I do think it's some kind of a central platform or some system within the vehicle that allows for the integration of multiple technologies in an easier way for the operator. Sorry for
Fred?
the challenge.
No, it's actually, we kind of accept your challenge because we do see that, today with systems, you can have multiple systems, and that's why we've looked at integrating the camera and the radar technology together to work together. We find we get a higher level of performance with that, as well as the reduction of multiple alerts that could distract the driver. But what I wanted to touch on was, first of all, Robert, we're privately held, so if you do get caught with stock, it's his, not mine. Okay? But what I really wanted to...
Thank you for helping the investigators.
Jennifer's calling on her phone right now, I can tell. But one of the things I want to talk about is regulation aside, there is value in some regulations. When we saw ABS get mandated the second time, when the technology was ready, the take rates today are 98 to 99%. And we see the same thing probably will happen eventually with stability, not quite as high because it's not covering all the vehicles that does, but that the ABS mandate did. But, there are some good regulations. There are some regulations that shouldn't be there, and I'm not here to tout regulations because I think one of the things that helps in terms of driving vehicle adoption is what we've seen from a number of the OEMs. Tim mentioned that Volvo has made their Volvo Active Driver Assist standard on their vehicles. Peterbilt, Kenworth, and Navistar have made collision mitigation, radar-based collision mitigation standard on their vehicles. That opportunity, and Volvo was actually the first to mandate stability back in, I wasn't sure if it was 2006 or 2008, but yeah, I think you're probably right, since you are Volvo. I'm not going to argue with you.
Hold me to that.
I'm not going to argue with you, Tim. But the take rates did go up, and even though there are delete credits on these, it does boost the fleet to really consider having this technology as part of their repertoire of safety. Because there are factors that do come into play that if you do delete a safety system and something happens that safety system may have been able to help avoid, that could be troublesome for the fleet in the future. So I think the adding of these technology standards helps the fleet to realize that the OEM has decided that there's a value in this technology, and the fleet really needs to consider that.
Nanda?
Couple of points to add. Thing was down. So the ESC mandate that's coming up, starting pretty soon, like next month. We anticipate that with that, the take rate for AEB systems or CMS systems will increase because now it's just one additional thing that you have to do. You don't need to add stability plus collision mitigation system. So that should help. And we have over 100, I might be wrong with the numbers. I'm not a sales guy, so we have over 120,000 radars sold. So, and we anticipate much more higher take rate coming up pretty soon because of the ESC mandate. A couple of other things we believe, or I've been reading through some of the following distance rules for different states and everything. What I think will help also with the take rate or acceptance of the system is we have different following distance rules in different states, right? So, we are forced to have our following distance between 2.8 to 3.5, 3.6 seconds because you cannot believe Michigan has 500 feet following distance. And some states have as close as like 2 seconds. I believe New Jersey has 100 feet. So it's varying, right? So, and drivers, from an acceptance standpoint, they mix up ACC and AEB, as I mentioned before, right? So if there is a uniform following distance certified, or if there's a federal law that states that, okay, this is the following distance for commercial vehicle, that will help the system acceptance because ACC is the one that they encounter pretty much every day. Not everybody is going to experience an AEB event every day, right? So the system acceptance will help. And a couple of other points which I'd like to put it as a request is, not necessarily looking at regulations for ADAS systems, but re-reviewing some of the regulations that we already have. For example, brake lights, right? So it's a rule that we have to turn the brake lights on if the system is applying thing. But with the introduction of ADAS systems, we have already warned the driver, so we know something is actually happening in the front. The driver behind us doesn't know about it, right? So it's a violation if we turn the brake lights or flash the brake lights to the rear vehicle. But if you're allowed to do that, it can address one of the situation like, okay, already flashing the brake lights to inform the the drivers behind us, so that when we apply the brakes, this big truck is coming to a stop, it has enough reaction time for the following vehicles. But it's against the law right now.
Sorry, distance on my vision. Sean?
Make sure that's on. In terms of the take rates and discussion about getting a regulation, I think the other part that has to be considered that is it's not only getting the take rate for when these vehicles are being produced, but you have the added time lag of the fleet turning over. And so we, in our petition that we submitted, there was an entire detail about ESC and passenger cars and what we saw there in terms of the take rate, that until regulation was almost pending, you did not see the take rate in light trucks. And then all of a sudden you saw this humongous steep curve of them, everyone trying to catch up, when the trucks were the vehicles that were going to need ESC the most at that point. So why we push for regulation, why we support it is, number one, because it levels the playing field in terms of what the performance is going to be and establishes that standard. It also helps in terms of bringing down the price for that system when you start getting to mass quantities. But also because we know that there's such a long delay between regulation and then when it starts to be implemented and when people start to take it up, and then you get the turnover of the vehicle fleet, which is, I think, 10 years now for passenger cars at least.
One quick question. Mike?
I think the trucking industry is very diverse in terms of the not only the size of the carriers, but the operations. And so I think one of the things that feeds into sort of the ramp up of the take rate has to do with, some companies, look at this and they say, well, we're different, right? That's not our operation. And so it takes them a little time to decide that this is actually going to work. They may look at it as, well, we don't do as much on highway driving as some other fleet, and so we don't, this technology isn't maybe going to benefit us. And then later on, as the technology gets out there and there's more vehicles with it, more fleets, and there's more demonstration of its benefits, they start to see, oh, this will apply to my operation. Another one is also concerns about how the technology will perform in that environment. So again, if somebody's doing more interstate highway driving and sees a value to it, but somebody else is doing more on rural roads off interstate, maybe they believe for some reason the technology is not going to work as well for them. And sometimes we do see these things as the technology develops, a second generation, a third generation addresses some of the shortcomings of the earlier ones. And so it does sort of build up on itself, and then as the big fleets purchase more of it, the price comes down, the technology gets better, and the smaller fleets start to see that this is a benefit to them. And so as you can see, as Richie said about the Daimler, it went from it doubled the take rate in 2 years. And so you do sort of hit some inflection point, in which case, there's a much greater demand for the technology.
Well, this is a question for you and Gary then. I've heard multiple times that with large companies there's a fairly good take rate because they see the benefits of it. What happens at your companies, at your associations, to bring that information down to the smaller companies?
Well, actually, that reminds me of one point I was going to pick up too, is that the issue of the initial purchase cost. Again, that's a different burden on a smaller company than it might be on a larger company in terms of the capital expenditure. And so they may recognize some value to it, but they need, and this may get into the actually, this incentives is part of this too. Is there a way to help them offset that difficulty with, an insurance discount or a tax credit or something that would help deal with that. And again, sometimes that can happen because the large fleets now have enough exposure that the insurance companies can start to look at the rates and determine whether they can offer a discount or not, where early on they don't know that.
Every year at our National Safety Conference, we bring in a combat plaintiff's lawyer to talk about his or her success in suing the trucking industry. And it's a very eye-opening kind of experience to look at the statistics over the last 5 years in particular of these nuclear awards, these catastrophic jury awards and court awards for accidents involving a commercial truck. In 2015, the largest one of record we heard about last year was $182 million. For conduct, the jury found and the court affirmed by the trucking company that had grossly failed and intentionally apparently failed to do general maintenance PM schedules on their trucks that were not that old. That resulted, that was the proximate cause of the death of the driver. So these awards and their size are very chilling to companies, and they think about, like Adam has often said at our shows when he's been a keynote speaker, we're one accident away from being put out of business. One bad accident might change the whole outlook of the company's perception of the private fleet as a value. So this has caused fleets of all sizes to be more keenly aware and interested in this technology and to embrace it. I will say this, before coming here the last couple of weeks, I did a random survey of a half a dozen or so companies that are using various combinations of the technology that we're talking about. What I wanted to find out was, what is the burden, the cost burden of adaptation? What I found is that the average cost per vehicle per month on a 5-month lease for a collision avoidance, lane departure, I think anti-rollover, maybe even automated transmission, some combination though, was in the range of $135 to $150 per vehicle per month on a 5-year lease. Now, if you step back and think about that cost, added cost, to an operation that has 50 trucks, 75 trucks, they're making a difference. Only one truck has to cause a bad accident. You quickly develop an ROI case, regardless of size. But I'm wondering, among the 500,000 motor carriers in America, have any of this technology, regardless of cost, just because they can't afford it?
Tony?
Yeah, I just want to chime in related to the ELD mandate was brought up, and just our perspective on how it's influenced adoption and at least acceptance of, particularly with us with our electronic inspection solution. It's been really pretty awesome to see just how much awareness and interest in abiding by the ELD mandate has raised awareness and a lot of interest in what we're doing, and I'm sure lots of other companies that are similar. But the growth has been tremendous among both very large carriers and companies and fleets, but also the really small ones as well. And as a technology provider, it's one of our major goals is to just reduce friction wherever we can to adopting our technology. And that's been something that we've seen just tremendous growth on the inspection side. And we've got, like in the last year alone, almost 10 million inspection items, or about 400,000 inspections have been conducted, and that was up just tremendously over previous years. And a lot of that's just due to the awareness that a mandate has kind of caused people to wake up and go out and look for a solution.
Sean? Kevin?
So I just wanted to, we talked about this before, how each fleet is kind of unique in how it can get benefits out of these systems. Having a comprehensive training program is the best way to get value out of these systems, and the ROI you can get out of having that compared to just putting it on your trucks and forgetting about it is massive. But I think we do a lot of webinars, we do a lot of outreach, since we do research on these technologies to try and educate fleets on what they're capable of and how they can use them. And these kinds of comprehensive safety programs are often a foreign language to them. They may not even have that kind of comprehensive, and the decision to buy this technology may be the impetus of, do we need to start thinking about that kind of solution? And we've done research on how different kinds of training can affect the outcomes of the training, and if there was some sort of way that fleets that don't have this program can learn from fleets that do, I think it would be a very valuable tool for getting them to adopt the technology. Like someone else brought up, they may look at another fleet and say, that's not us. They're different than us. They're fundamentally different than us. But there are things that you can learn from them. And if there's a way to pull that and say, start here and then build off of that, that would be a very valuable tool.
Tom?
Sure, just two responses. One to the question of regulation versus voluntary. It strikes me that we could potentially pursue both. I believe we've already reached the tipping point. I think Richie's example at Daimler Truck in terms of the purchasing is out there. There are already large fleets that are using it, that already have the data, that have already validated the system. It would seem as if while NHTSA and FMCSA could pursue a regulation, which we know is going to take longer, we have OEM representation here, we have large fleets represented here, that could also help pursue a voluntary approach. It would seem like both paths could be pursued, especially with the idea of either you can voluntarily adopt now with the information that is available, or recognize that a regulation is forthcoming. Just my first thought. The other one was with respect to ROI. I think sometimes there's this sense, well, for smaller companies, an ROI might be difficult or daunting. I think what many safety professionals will say, whenever you're looking at an ROI, you always know what the cost is. What you don't always know is what the benefit is. And if you take a very hard look at what the benefits are of the system, the full benefits, you will see that it is not only the right thing to do for highway safety, for your associates, for the highway, but also a good business move. And so as we talk about education, educating the industry on its efficacy, perhaps even some basics around what to consider for an ROI and why that would be of value. And then along those lines, incentives. We for a new truck with safety technology that comes from the OEM, there's an excise tax that we have to pay. Incenting carriers to drop that excise tax, to encourage them to want to this technology. That would go a long way. Or even as the concept has been kicked around, the term beyond compliance, giving folks that are early adopters an incentive from a compliance perspective to actively pursue this. I think that would all help the voluntary approach while at the same time working towards a regulatory approach.
Okay. Jim?
This is more of a question than anything else, and I ask it on behalf of a lot of my readers. To the insurance companies, where are the discounts or the incentives to invest in this equipment if they keep telling me that it's not there? So if you can enlighten us on that.
Okay. This is the time I'm not happy to be the only insurance person here. First of all, I just want to start briefly by saying the underwriting process and the laws and regulations for commercial auto insurance and personal lines automobile insurance are very different. So often we see personal lines commercials on TV for all different, for your personal vehicles, and if you add this, or this, you get discounts. Unfortunately, commercial insurance is not legally set up that way and is not underwritten that way for a variety of reasons, some of which are not controlled by the insurance industry. So for the most part, the underwriter is looking at a fleet and then looking back. It's a retrospective view. It's a 5-year look back, generally a 5-year look back. And when you're looking at the effectiveness of any product or programs or trainings or staffing or types of vehicles or technology on the vehicles, you're going to look at 5 years back. So to suggest that Oh, well, it sounds like a good suggestion, just give a discount. So if you add any kind of adaptive cruise control technology, or you add some other technology and you add it today, it doesn't change what happened 4 years and 364 days ago. It just starts changing things today. Actuarially, rates are often determined by with actuarial research input, and it's based on previous experiences, not only within the company that you're looking at, but within the industry, the part of the industry, the region, a variety of geographic issues. So, having said that, the concept of saying just give a discount is probably not realistic. However, an underwriter will always look at the quality of the fleet's performance in the past and what they're doing now to mitigate any previous issues. So when an underwriter looks at, the underwriter is the person who does this evaluation, looks at the fact that the fleet has added cameras, they've added a array of technology, they've spent money and they've invested in their company, that is going to be perceived as a company that has a much better potential for reduction in claims or crashes and other kinds of issues. And if they do, because everyone does have claims, they will be smaller or more manageable. That results in a better premium rate for that company without necessarily calling it a credit or some kind of a way of saying, if you have this, then this is your rate. It's a little bit more scientific. The other aspect of what we try to do, and I can't speak for every company, is we try to work with companies with programs. We've worked with folks from many of the companies here, DriveCam particularly, and many of the other companies, where we do demonstration projects. And we will try to fund portions of the movement into technology as an incentive. It is not, can't be a premium reduction, but it's an incentive by working with that company, almost like a grant of some type, to get them to try something. Then the folks in my area, we have to evaluate, is it being used successfully? Is it being maintained? Is it being interactive? And does it work when it needs to work? All that goes back to the underwriter, and that's how they make their decision in the following year. Remember, the insurance contract tends to be a one-year contract. So every year, everyone gets to change horses if they choose to. So it's a short period of time. Anyway, the answer is yes, the insurance industry can work with this. And honestly, if there was a mandate, that is easier for us to deal with. The mandate can be in sequential ways, and it can be in a movement along different time frames. But mandates are easier for us to deal with because then we can say, yes, you have it, or no, you don't. I don't know if that answers your question. Does it help?
If I can ask a question just on my own right now, and this is just my curiosity, do you think we get to a 90% or above take rate by 2025 without regulation? It's open to the room. Raise hands if anyone thinks no.
Anyone thinks no?
No. Okay. Do people think yes? We can get there? Thank you. The one guy who has to regulate it says, I'm hoping.
It's a biased vote.
So, and I apologize because you're in a tough position, certainly a very tough position with rulemaking underway. So what I'll do is I'll ask you a harder question first, and I'll get to the other ones that are on the side. I've got a couple things that have come from the audience. How about cash for clunkers for trucks to get good new technology on trucks?
Yes. That's a great idea.
That goes to NHTSA. So.
And, you know, I wasn't at NHTSA when we did the light vehicle program there, but, thank you. But it was enormously successful. I think it was pioneered by California. Frankly, you know, it hasn't added a lot of discussion relative to safety, but I think it's certainly something, you know, that could be discussed and figure out whether the merits work.
I'll tell you one thing that I see great promise in. We haven't talked much about V2V, and again, good protection on the V2V rulemaking too. So, but that is one technology that I was very happy to get to camp one time, and have GM show me a box under $100. It's dumb, you know. It's not going to do much as far as you, but it's going to tell the other vehicles about you. And, you know, I compare that to HDTV. You know, V2V doesn't work unless everyone's playing. HDTV doesn't work unless everyone's on board. And the government had a good role in that, in transitioning people to that. So, you know, I think there is some benefit to incentives, but it's money, and where does that come from? You have your thing up, so I'll let you go wherever you want to go.
Sure, thanks. I guess I've got several comments. Bear with me. Actually, I'd like to address one from the last session about customer acceptance. So one thought, and it was touched on by a lot of folks. I think, Jim, you mentioned it in particular, and that is the driver vehicle interface issues and standardization. And so, you know, in the light vehicle area, we're of course doing research on these technologies, and there is an enormous difference in light vehicles in how the driver is informed about whether it's a cautionary warning, an imminent warning. Is it something to the left? Is it something to the right? Do you brake hard? Do you steer? And it's sort of the wild, wild west, and it's a little bit intimidating. Now, in light vehicles, you know, there's a certain, frankly, I think there could be benefits from standardization even in the light vehicle area there. But there's a certain justification in that you buy a vehicle, you drive it, you're in it for 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years, right? You get whatever it is you get used to. You know, it seems to me, depending certainly on the trucking operations, you know, maybe in Adam's case, the same driver's in a truck for that same truck for, you know, a period of time. But many, many types of operations, you know, a driver's in a different truck the next week and the week after that and the week after that. And if we don't see some sort of standardization on what this buzzer means, what this seat vibration means, what this light on the dash that's hard to see, what got to cross through it, you know, it seems to me drivers get confused, and it does affect customer acceptance. So certainly through SAE or other voluntary associations, there's, I think, some significant benefit to be had through additional research, you know, around standardization, at least of the driver vehicle interface part of it. And I think it could be done without still stifling innovation, you know, or product differentiation that I know needs to be there, but I think some boundaries make sense. So that's last session. So with regard to, you know, the question of mandates, voluntary adoption mandates and so forth. So, you know, Mike, you were a part of this. I think it was maybe 3 years ago in the light vehicle area. You know, NHTSA and IIHS issued a challenge to industry to make automatic emergency braking and forward collision warning, you know, standard on their products. And there was some discussions and back and forth, and different sorts of details worked out about when and what percentage of vehicles. But, you know, the agreement is, as everyone in the room knows, famously did get worked out. And, you know, we are on track to have, you know, over 90% of light vehicles with this exact technology we're talking about, you know, available on a light vehicle. So, in fact, it's kind of amazing to me. If you go on a Toyota lot today, you can't even buy a Corolla without this technology. So why it isn't voluntarily adopted on trucks is, you know, I think we have to scratch our heads. So I guess I'll just reiterate the challenge that, you know, that we and IIHS had 3 years ago. We made that challenge for all vehicles, by the way. It wasn't just for light vehicles. And so I think, first of all, you know, it's as simple and as complex as, you know, kind of just doing it. I was encouraged to hear Volvo's announcement. That's fantastic. And I was encouraged to hear the market take rate from Daimler and some of the other OEMs. So it seems like, you know, the technology is certainly on the rise. So that's sort of the balance.
Great. And I'd love to give you more time, but I just got a 2-minute signal behind me. Uri?
So I just have 2 minutes, so I have to hurry up.
Oh, no, you have about 22 seconds.
Okay. So since I think I was the only guy who voted both no and yes to your question before, I just want to explain why I think that we won't achieve 90% of penetration rate by 2025, but I also think that we can achieve that. It's pretty easy to show why we won't. It's a pretty simple back-of-the-envelope calculation just by taking the current scrap rate of the heavy-duty vehicle and the current sales, even assuming that starting 2018, 100% of new vehicles of heavy-duty trucks will have collision avoidance technology in them, which they will not. It will still take about 15 years to have all of the commercial vehicles in America with this technology. So why did I also answer yes? And that's because it is possible. And the reason for, and the way it's possible, we can learn from other countries in the world, is by regulation that is not only for new vehicles, but also for retrofitting, for used vehicle. Trucks today stay more and more on the road. A new truck today without any collision avoidance technology will still probably drive on the US roads in the next 15 years without any forward collision warning, any lane departure warning. There are some countries in the world that regulated not only new vehicles, but also existing vehicles with forward collision warning, with lane departure warning, and the results are incredible. One of those countries is Israel, which within 3 years got about 50% penetration for forward collision warning, not just with vehicles, but also with pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists, which is a little bit more advanced type of collision warning. And then there are some other creative programs that we can think about. So, for example, we have in America, both on the federal level and on the state level, we have programs that intend to incentivize fleets to purchase electric vehicles, electric trucks, either by tax rebate or other incentivize. There's no reason not to have programs like this for ADAS, to incentivize, to subsidize the installing, either by installing ADAS on new vehicles or by used vehicles. Another creative example that we saw in the world is, again, incentivize ADAS, but instead of trying to incentivize the final, the end user, the customer, instead of trying to use the pull method of trying to encourage people to buy ADAS, they're trying to encourage and to incentivize the OEMs, the OEMs or the dealers or the importers of the vehicles by basically subsidize this kind of technology with them. So if all the importers of the vehicles or the vehicle manufacturers themselves get some kind of subsidize, that definitely can highly accelerate the rate of penetration.
Great. And I'm going to cut into our break we don't have. I'll try to get to you three real quick, but I do have one question, and this is related to beyond compliance, beyond also related to a truck NCAP possibly. I understand in Europe from talking to parents who've lost their children to truck accidents that you can get a bronze, silver, or gold rating depending on some of the technologies you have on board. From FMCSA or NHTSA's point of view, do you see any of those and again, I know you're under rulemaking, so, but is that some of the purpose there to incentivize that same sort of, you do not see a two-star car out there. Hopefully one day we'd see no two-star trucks either.
Well, with respect to beyond compliance, I don't know what the final solution set looks like, but all I can say is we do have research looking into the safety impacts of different approaches, different solutions, yeah.
On a truck NCAP or some other kind of rating for trucking? I'll let Lisa.
The idea of an NCAP for heavy-duty vehicles is, I think it's come up, at various times over the last 5 or more years, really, I guess, since light vehicles had NCAP. And certainly, we're all ears with regard to, ideas the industry whether it's the fleets or, manufacturers may want to have regarding such a program. I guess personally, I wonder about its success, at least let's just say relative to light vehicles. So the idea on light vehicles is, an individual customer out there, they're not professionals. They're pretty uninformed. They go to the dealer lot, and the idea behind NCAP is this is a very quick, high-level assessment of, how safe this vehicle is. And, and our research has shown that's been useful. I'm just not sure if it's like that with trucks where we have, fleet purchasers studying and these kind of meetings and a much more sophisticated purchaser that's looking at the pros and cons of each and every option because they're making big decisions, whether the kind of information that's pretty darn high level that an NCAP would provide would be worth it. But again, certainly something to, that could be considered.
Thanks. And Tim, and you nodded your head a little bit on understanding the British kind of rating from a secondary silver, bronze. Are those effective for companies to get that credit for having safety technology?
I think I was nodding my head saying, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Oh, good. I made it.
No, I'm not familiar with the British.
No, the victims made it to me. So anyway, go ahead with your comment.
No, I was just going to say that, it's good that again, we're collaborating. One thing we're seeing more of is a lot of work done prior to having a regulation, so we have a smoother transition in. So I think that ESC is a good example of that. So it's important. And I just wanted to point out also, we have to, I think definitely on tractor-trailer combinations, obviously that's one that we're going to see some of the higher rates and so forth, and I think we can get pretty close. When we talk about trucks, that's a different animal because we have vocational trucks with all kinds of different applications, maybe equipment that's blocking the sensors or the radar and also the cameras. So that's where it's going to take some additional work and thought.
I want to thank you all again for this. I believe there are possible ways forward. Regulation's nice, but with the NCAP that gave a sense of testing and then the testing for imminent braking for cars, at least gave the manufacturers a path on what actually it meant to have a system. I'm ready to commit the board because they're not here to look at me. But Insurance Institute, board, myself, NHTSA, I'd love to get together with truck manufacturers and talk about, is there some voluntary, and obviously you all, because you've got to be able to make the parts for all them. But the reality is we should have something for a target. We're not going to achieve zero, as we've talked about today, if we don't set ourselves difficult targets to try and meet. And we don't have to do everything through regulation if we're all on the same page that it's a safe technology and needs to be out there. So I look forward to talking to you some more about that and more with your company and more with NSC. So thank you very much, and I need to transition to Alex.
Thanks, Rob. That's it. I mentioned earlier that these sessions and the topics overlap, and they do. The topic for discussion is overcoming challenges and identifying implementation strategies. And it sounds to me like we've been touching on that for the past 45 minutes or so. I want to ask the panel about data, because we are very interested in how these systems work, what are the most effective ways of introducing the systems, et cetera. And who owns the data now, and how does it get shared? Is it possible to share that? Is it possible to find out in an anonymous way what is happening inside an individual truck or inside an individual safety feature? If a crash occurs, did the driver turn the safety feature off? Was the safety feature on and it malfunctioned? Is there a way to get at that basic information so that policymakers can make informed choices? I'd like to just start off, if anybody has any thoughts about this.
Sure. Yes, it is possible to get that, and I guess we're talking both on an aggregate and a truck-specific application. You know, we've been willing to share our data from ELDs to sleep apnea to speed limiters, and we would certainly be willing to share our aggregated, anonymized data, just as we do with Virginia Tech and FMCSA and Mainway and others that we have partnered with. So I think at a very high level, absolutely, and I know that my peers that are here in the room with me would also agree to that. So that would not be an issue. I think on the truck specific, yes, that could be done as well. Again, it would have to be anonymous, but we have worked with the Wisconsin DOT on helping them train their enforcement officers on ECMs and the data that's in there, and we would certainly be willing to provide the same to whether it's the NTSB or NHTSA or anything that would help advance this. Again, it's about it has to be anonymous in terms of the driver, but in terms of support, there's certainly carrier support to advance this technology.
Terrific. Tim?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just generally speaking, we treat, obviously there's public concerns there about releasing data and information. The way we treat it is that data is owned by the owner of the vehicle. So there is a lot of good information there that we use in crash investigations today, speeds and things like that we can see with these onboard systems. So it's very useful information. We're starting to learn more and more about crashes, and it's extremely helpful when we get to a crash accident investigation. But we can't use that alone. We have to collect the information from the accident site and witnesses and so forth. But again, it is good information, and we see it, or at least Volvo sees it as owned by the owner of the vehicle.
Thank you. Sean?
Yeah, this may be more applicable to passenger vehicles, but as we get more and more of this technology into vehicles, and as we start adding on more ADAS systems, we need to take another look at EDRs, both for commercial vehicles and for passenger vehicles, because as we start to transition towards those higher levels of autonomy, we're going to want to know, everyone's going to want to know what that vehicle's decision-making was and why it decided to do whatever it did before that collision happened. And that's going to be important, I think, across for people doing the research, for the suppliers that are developing it, for insurers, for manufacturers. They want to know that their product is working right. And we've heard the discussions. I know, Eric was mentioning before the research they're doing right now, looking at what the crash rate was of Waymo, of their vehicles. We have a much lower tolerance for a machine screwing up than we do for a human being screwing up. And to assume that people aren't going to want to know what that machine was doing when it was driving them around and got into an accident or into a crash, that's not going to happen. So I think that's a part of us having to really look at all the aspects of our regulations and how they're all going to interact. The statement made before was great, that looking at cutting off your nose to spite your face. If you dump ESC, but ESC is the basis for getting autonomous vehicles, what have you done if you get rid of it?
Good. Thank you. Kevin?
So I don't want to talk too much about some of the higher levels of automation, but you did hit on a very fundamental issue with acceptance, which is some types of this machine learning that may go into the decision-making for ADAS or other types of technology, higher levels of automation. It's almost unknowable how the machine arrived at the decision it did arrive at. And it may just come down to we have to accept the decision-making of the system and how it arrived at that decision is unknowable. And that, I don't know if there's a perception of some of that with the ADAS technology in the lower levels, that it is unknowable. I mean, I think right now it is more of a procedural type of decision-making process, but it will be an acceptance issue with this and other autonomous technologies.
Thank you. Fred?
So to answer your first question in terms of who owns the data, from our perspective, the data is owned by the fleet. Okay, so the fleet has the control over the data. We do reserve the right, of course, if we're subpoenaed or such that we can share that data anonymously, but the fleet is the primary controller of the data. The second thing I wanted to touch on is that outside of the systems that collect data for driver training and things along those lines. You know, there are base levels of data within the systems that exist on the vehicle. But it's important to remember that a lot of times this data is not designed for accident reconstruction purposes. This data is really designed to determine, you know, was the system working at the time, or was there a fault or things along those lines that code it. Because it's important because a lot of times folks will think, oh, well, I'll just get the data off the braking system ECU, and that's all I need. And the reality is it's not. There's a lot that goes into the dynamics of a crash, and there's a lot that goes into understanding those implications that is not necessarily captured by the system. So to Sean's point, and I don't disagree that a data recorder that is robust, because along the same lines, these systems are not fireproof, they're not waterproof, they're not, or these ECUs that collect this data are not that way. So if a truck crashes, if power gets cut, if there's a fire or something, that data is lost. But there is the need, I believe, that we do need to get to having that information secured and ready and collecting more than just basic data from system to system.
Thank you. Dr. Riegel?
We are hearing more and more, you know, what is the federal role in all this, and especially data, and that it begs for us to look at how can we provide some harmonization of data from all sources and for it to be useful to answer the question, what is safe? And so, you know, just pretty much, you know, that comment that's, you know, what we should be looking at, what we're looking at.
Marie?
So data is a very complex issue, but I think we have to also to identify when we talk about data, what exactly are we talking about? Because we already have data coming up from vehicles, from other systems, from other computers, but we actually talk about ADAS type of data. And why do we even need that? So first of all, we need data as the manufacturers in order to develop better systems, in order to go to a higher level of automation. As we go to level 3, 4, 5 in the future, we will need this data, and also in order to be able to have self-driving vehicles, which include other types of technology, mapping and other types of technology, but not only higher levels of automation, even more advanced level 0, 1, 2 of ADAS, such as possible system that will alert the driver or automatically the vehicle whenever the driver approaches a construction zone. For that, you'll need to have some type of over-the-air parameter change for the ADAS system, which will use also the vehicle system. So that's one reason why we even need this data. The second reason is for validation of the system, whether for the regulator, to the customers, for our own research. We need this data in order to use to actually know to run simulators to validate the system. But two other reasons why we need this data is, first of all, the first of them is for the benefit of the user, whether it's a fleet owner or the actual private or the actual driver. They can use this data in order to better train the drivers. And we have seen from more programs in the past that Mobileye did, that by using this data, taking the Mobileye alerts or the ADAS alerts, or whatever ADAS alerts there are, and using them as part of the driver training program, you actually can have a profound benefit of driver behavior change. And then the fourth reason why we even need this data is something that's a little bit less in the media or the news, but we can use this data to benefit the public. And by public, I mean the citizens and the cities and municipalities. We develop already, maps of the danger zones in the entire United States, which DOTs, cities, municipalities, and also fleets themselves can use it to optimize the routes, the driving routes, in order to avoid some kind of danger zones where they're more prone to collisions. When we can also identify infrastructure deficiencies where some places are more prone to have some kind of incidents. So there are a lot of benefits why we need the data, but as a starter, data is a very complex issue. So you ask about ownership, but we need to also differentiate between two things. There is ownership and then there's right of use. Both of them, I think that the answer is not so simple. We heard that for Bendix, the ownership is by the fleet, but the ownership might be of the fleet, it might be by the vehicle manufacturers, might be between the vehicle manufacturer and the ADAS manufacturer with the right of use to the final customer. It's also depend is the ADAS system comes as an OEM or as a retrofit. Just upon one challenge. So when we already see it in passenger vehicles, a little bit less in trucks, but with passenger vehicles, it's very much like the iPhone or Android. When you buy a new one, you have to sign to accept the terms of use because because the vehicle manufacturer collect data, and whoever buys this truck, whoever buys this passenger vehicle, need to accept the terms of use that are allowing basically the OEM to collect this data. But then what happened in the used vehicle industry? When you sell this vehicle, when you sell your truck or when you sell your car, the person who buys this vehicle, he or she didn't sign this, didn't accept these terms. Then what happened? It's a little bit legal question, just to illustrate the complexity that we have here, and we at Mobileye, when we work with tier one or with vehicle manufacturers, this issue needs to be some kind solved together with the regulation.
Thank you. Robert?
I do think, I agree with almost everything that's been stated here. The data generally belongs to the customer. However, I do think it's important, if you're collecting data, to consider the purpose of the collection and the situation. If it's anonymous data, as Tom suggested, for a fleet or for a type of vehicle or for a type of a system that's being used from an educational purpose internally or for public education, that's one thing. Once there's a crash, though, or a claim, the data situation changes because the driver has certain, the driver may be involved, and the company may be involved in criminal investigations. And that completely changes the process of looking at data. So the setting up an expectation that all data should be available is probably unrealistic. However, so anonymous data, system data, vehicle data, region data, whatever it may be, anonymous may be very interesting for the public good. On the other hand, there are strong legal issues and personal rights issues for use of data after a crash and a claim that really need to be carefully thought about because additional exposure can happen when information is provided not through our legal system, and you're creating additional exposure for agencies, for groups, for associations, and potentially for the owner and perhaps the driver. So it's just a cautionary aspect, but we agree that data should be used. We struggle with the idea of how do we don't, at the insurance company, when we're working with a demonstration project with one of our policyholders and some of the providers, we technically don't have access to the data unless the policyholder voluntarily agrees to that part of the project. Then it's what do we do with that data? How do we respond individually to that company in terms of their training program, in terms of their vehicles, in terms of, then it gets to their routes, the types of vehicles, how they're maintaining their vehicles, how they're maintaining the systems. It gets pretty complicated. So data management, I think, has to be very carefully sliced into segments that are useful to everyone who's interested.
I appreciate everybody's very careful
analysis and description. Ananda?
I'd like to add to what Fred and Nuri said. The way we see data is there are, let's say, from an engineer technical standpoint, like two kinds of data, right? Development data and or debug data plus what we have as in operational vehicle data. The purpose of this data, when a system is in production, is to show that what the driver was doing, like the driver inputs, right? So, what was his position on steering, throttle, cruise control, things like that, and the status of the system, right? So it's not going to be possible to reconstruct an accident or reconstruct the algorithm with the data that's available on the bus. So the OEMs don't allow us to put everything on the vehicle bus, right? So the way the manufacturers and the OEMs see the data than what the insurance company and others see the data. We all use the same term data, but it's different, right? So what's data in our head is different than what data people see on the other side, right? But one thing that happened in the recent past is the few years is the addition of video data, right? So you had some elements, right? So we know that, hey, the driver had the cruise control on or the cruise control off, the system was working fine, and now we are adding the video, right? So I think more players have the video system now. That's helping. Again, it's not the reconstruction data, but it's another piece of the puzzle, right? That's helping you get to the point where you wanted to go. So this is the current state of the data, but I personally believe that with the introduction of V2V, the way we see the data is going to change, because now the algorithm input is not just your own data, right? So you need to know what's happening in the other vehicle. That means you need to come up with out of your box and say, okay, I need to share a little bit more information to the other vehicle so both of us can make a better decision. So at that point, this data elements will slowly start to come out and we'll start sharing more information. But until then, the data that we have available today is video plus just informational data, not necessarily reconstruction of accident or reconstruction of algorithm. It's going to be really hard to build back, reverse engineer the decision and why it was made.
Thank you. Kevin?
I thought I would just share a practical example of some of the data that we've collected and how it might be useful for a fleet to help understand what their individual needs are for ADAS and maybe improve the acceptance at the fleet level and the way that some of the designers of the systems may be able to incorporate their needs. So we recorded the same data available to fleets, and one example that you mentioned, drivers disabling the technology. There is a limited capability for that right now. In our study, drivers had a button to disable lane departure warnings for 15 minutes. I believe the design intent would be like a construction zone where the lanes aren't clearly marked. And we were curious if drivers were abusing this button. And the short answer is we did see some evidence for that. Some of it was drivers who just didn't want to have that and were perpetually disabling it. But we also saw some other interesting data where drivers were situationally disabling the technology. And we looked back at that and we saw, for example, one driver who some days would never disable it, some days would disable it for long periods of time. And ultimately we went back and found out that it was a team operation. And he was disabling the alerts when his team driver was sleeping in the cab. And this was data that would be available to the company. I don't believe they were monitoring lane departure warnings in the data stream, but they would be able to see that and say, why is this driver doing this? What's the reasoning behind this? So maybe for us, that particular aspect of ADAS technology would be evaluated a little differently than other aspects. Or moving upstream, if there was a haptic option available, they may say, oh, that's what we need for our fleet. Whereas other fleets, it might be completely different.
Interesting. Sean?
So I think there's another aspect of collecting the data and what it can be used for, not just in terms of reconstruction, but in terms of what originally EDRs were for, which were to improve product development, to review how things were performing, specifically airbags and braking. And I know the words came out before about edge cases from Kevin at VTTI that we all learn one way to drive right now. We learn from somebody else, we get back on the road, and then we all make our own mistakes. Sadly enough, we all make the same mistakes. As we start moving to higher levels of automation, identifying those edge cases, those rarities that occur that fool the system. So let's say a tractor trailer across a road that gets confused with an open road. we have to figure out what is that uniformity of data that needs to be provided to all of the players to say, this was a case that we identified, and how much information do we need so that supplier A and supplier B and manufacturer C can all go and retrain their system and say, all right, we know this is a problem case. Everybody should raise to this level. I know that TRB and SAE are both have committees working on identifying what your scenarios will be for testing these systems as we go forward. Because unlike traditional regulations where we do airbags and we throw a car vehicle against a wall at 30 miles an hour and we say, okay, it's going to cover us everywhere from 0 to 30. When you talk about an autonomous vehicle and the higher level systems, they now have to work. If you say this thing works on a sunny day, is that as soon as the sun comes up? Is that twilight? Is that high sun? Is that cloudy, not cloudy? And that's just where the sun is. That has nothing to do with what type of road it's on, what the weather is like, what the density is. It's now the variation has changed as to what your testing parameters are. And so collecting that information and unifying that, standardizing that information is going to be important to help all players come to the same level. So that way it's not just, Volvo found one case that's going to happen once in a million driving hours, and Merida Wabco found another one, and they're different, and now they don't know each other. And we have to find some way to make sure that everybody gets to understand how it works.
Thank you. Eric?
Thanks. So, the push toward automation keeps coming up. And I wanted to try to mention a point we have about the edge case of ADAS versus automation, which would be the SAE Level 2 systems. Those are systems that in some cases pretty much drive themselves, but the driver has to pay complete attention because it might not detect a vehicle. It might lose a lane line and just drift off. We believe that these systems, in terms of what data are collected on them, in terms of how they're treated in a regulatory manner, in terms of how they're developed, should be considered highly automated and not the same sort of thing as adaptive cruise control or AEB. Because drivers, as we have alluded to, are human and may tend to overestimate the capabilities of the system because it seems really capable. So if a system requires full attention, if it's driving itself, that's still automated and should be considered as such.
Before we go back for more questions on data, I just want to throw something else into the mix, and you're free to go back to data if you want to, but I want to talk about building trust among drivers. We've heard a lot about driver shortages. We've heard a lot about the idea that the industry needs highly qualified drivers. I'm wondering, with the introduction of these ADAS technologies that require your attention, that require you to monitor the states of your vehicles, is the driving role actually going to get more complicated and not less complicated, meaning that the position will become a more higher tech job? And wondering if any of you foresee that kind of development in your fleets and your drivers, or how you guys view that.
So before we leave the data question, I just wanted to add in one of the things to remember about the system data, or the system that's stored, or the data that's stored on the system, is the systems, like the ABS system, is not designed to store data. So it's got a limited capacity in terms of storage. So if your expectation is that, oh, I don't have to worry, I can pull data off the system, that may not be realistic because it can be overwritten. So if you do want data, I mean, if you're interested in getting data or information, there are plenty of good systems out there, Bendix, Wabco, Omnitrax, PeopleNet, others that have these systems as well, Lytix, that have these systems. Utilize those because that's what's important. But if you do have a crash or a situation that you feel you need to pull the data, it's important to pull the ECUs, the radar, the camera, and such before you move that truck, because it's possible in the movement of that truck that data can be lost or destroyed. So I just wanted to wrap that up since we had been talking about it, not to create expectations.
Yeah. As we are still staying in the data topic, I'll just add one more point. So, kind of addressing to Sean's question, right? So, as I mentioned previously, the data for the ADAS system, the need for the data for the ADAS system is different than the need for the data for higher levels of automation. It's completely different layers. Okay, so for the systems like AEB system that we're talking today, as Fred just mentioned, there are other systems like monitoring systems like Safety Direct, WAPCO's ProView, DriveCam, Lytic, all those things. They connect on the bus, they collect the data, they have video, so it kind of gives you an idea about it. So for higher levels of automation, when we go for situations like, okay, supplier A or OEM A, found this condition in their development, and whereas we found, we feel, or this is my personal thought too, is this is where the test protocols become more important, right? So when we deploy higher levels of automation, it's not sharing the data, then it becomes a joint development, right? So it's more of, okay, now do we address all these situations? It's more like building a library of test cases that we are all able to resolve. Okay, now the way we resolve the situation might be different, right? So it still allows the differentiation for the developers so that we have our own kind of data, but we all try to address the same problem, right? So that's my personal take on that, on not focusing on sharing the data, but focusing more on, okay, all systems should pass these test protocols as we go through the different layers of automation.
So I think we completely agree. That's what we're heading towards, is how do you standardize the data so that everyone has the freedom to address them their own way? It's just a matter of what information do you need to know so that you can go back and figure out how to address it on your own. So what do you need to know about the situation where this system didn't work, or it was recognized that the system wasn't working? So let's say if it was just in general AEB. We know AEB is going to be a building block to move towards higher levels of automation. If we find an edge case, what information is necessary so that you can provide it to everybody and say, hey, this was the situation, you go figure out how you're going to deal with it. That's what we're heading here. I think we're heading in the same path, that we're not looking to say everyone must do it the same way. That's not what we do right now with any regulation. We don't care how you keep the occupant from getting killed. We just want you to keep them from getting killed. The same thing with autonomous vehicles. It's not a matter of dictating specifically what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. It's mostly saying this is that library of cases, and that's what SAE is doing, that's what TRB is doing, and we're all trying to figure out what are the parameters around that.
We've got some questions on data, but I'm going to leave that topic alone for a little bit so we can move on. But we could come back to that. But anyway, I was asking about higher levels of driver knowledge and specialization, and whether or not you think that that's going to be happening. You want to take it, Adam?
Certainly, data is cool, but drivers are a lot more fun to talk about. I can tell you personally. If you have some time to kill, go spend some time with a driver. You'll never regret it, I promise you. I can tell you, and I would assume Thomas would share the view. I'm not sure that they'd be more sophisticated or specialized. I think the proliferation of a lot of the devices that are out there today really makes it easier for a driver to accept new technologies. I think, frankly, the driving job is getting a lot easier than where it was 10, 15 years ago. Not so much for the work that they have to do, but the manual intensiveness that used to occur with a truck driver is certainly getting a lot easier. I mean, power steering and automatic shifting or automated shifting certainly allows us to recruit a different driver than what we used to. And frankly, the drivers are still an older breed typically, but there are some younger generations coming in. A lot more females are coming in, and so the pool is widening. But I would say not so much about sophistication or such, but more of just a mindset and a flexibility to accept the new technology is what's needed in the future.
Thomas, do you agree?
Absolutely. I agree, absolutely. Yes, there's a lot more technology in the truck. There's more going on in the truck. Nothing that can't be overcome with proper training. But just as Adam mentioned, I think that the drivers adapt to it quickly. I think our drivers are savvy. They know technology already, and this is not something that, again, with awareness and training that they can get. And candidly, I think whether it's a newer driver or an experienced driver, they're going to look for companies that have safety technology because they recognize a company that's willing to invest in safety technology to keep them safe is also a company that has safety culture and is going to make smart decisions about themselves and about their work life that's going to keep them safe throughout their workday.
So this question came in, for fleets with forward collision warning, are you seeing an increase in lane change and sideswipe crashes? Anecdotally?
Anecdotally, no, we are not. And I understand the question. It's likely I see traffic is slowing ahead of me. I don't want my truck to slow down, so I'm going to swerve to the left or to the right to try to avoid it. I understand it. That's not frequency that we're seeing. And again, continued technology that assists lane departure warning, blind spot monitoring will continue to assist in mitigating those types of events.
What about traditional safety practices that we might have to change regarding our thinking and training? Just reading the question now. For instance, cruise control, or some of the other use cases. Do we need to change CDL manuals on some of the points in the manuals? And are there things that we need to address as a result of these new technologies?
I think with all technology, technology certainly changes driver training. It may not necessarily mean we have to deviate from it. Again, I think as was mentioned earlier today, if we're still talking about AEDs, it will activate inside 4 seconds. That doesn't necessarily mean that is the safe following distance. The safe following distance is still a guideline is still a good 7-second following distance to be able to react and respond to traffic around you. But I think the question is a good one, which is the truck is changing, the dynamics are changing, whether it's the truck or the automobiles. It's always worth taking a hard look at what's currently trained in the CDL manuals and to determine if there's some updates that may need to be made based on the new technology.
Kevin?
Oh boy. Okay. As you probably know, we have a testing system that all the jurisdictions use to test CLP holders for a CDL. It includes both the knowledge and skills component. And the knowledge and skills component match up to what is in the federal regulations in Section 383. We are always updating the driver manual with new information because things are always changing. However, there comes a time where you have to ask yourself, we can train or we can instruct the driver on this technology, but how do we test that they understand how this technology works? It's one thing to ask a question and have them answer A, B, or C. It's another thing to get them out on the road and have them understand how this technology is actually helping them in the task of driving that CMV. And how do we test them? We can't really, during a road test, say, hey, leave the lane, let's see if the lane departure warning comes on. We can't do that sort of testing. So how do we make sure that even if it's in the manual, they understand it and they are actually utilizing it correctly? That's the million-dollar question for us. But we are always changing the driver manual, and we are always changing the skills test, because even though we think we have the skills test ironed out and nailed down, every day I hear another story about how a driver has cheated the skills exercises or how they're being trained to just not do what we tell them to do in the driver manual. So.
Thank you. Last question that I have for today has to do with, actually it's one that's written down. So this is about communication via, for data, satellite versus cell versus V2V versus, is it all of the above? Is it some of the above? Is it, who feels like guessing the adoption curve here?
I won't guess the adoption curve, but I'll just say, there's lots of channels of communication in between vehicles, with the telematics services, with potential V2V, DSRC, with cellular. So there's, all of those technologies are going to be part of the solution as we move to automation and with the other systems in the truck.
Any other comments on that?
My only comment as a fleet operator, there are, nobody, we call it the dark side of the moon, some of the places that we haul. I mean, literally, it's, you're lucky to get a meal, let alone cellular service. And the technology that we have works fine. I mean, we will miss a signal at times, but it'll roll forward. And once we get back into cell service, it's fine. So in terms of contacting the driver and things like that, there's no issues with it.
So what didn't we touch on that any of you all would like to touch on today? Jim?
One of the things we haven't really mentioned here is the distraction factor, I think, of some of this technology. Anybody who's seen the dashboard on a recent vintage Class 8 will say there's probably 30 warning lights on it in addition to the gauges that are there. Some of the little icons are kind of difficult to make out with failing eyes like I have as an old guy. Some of them are just incomprehensible until you get the book out and figure, what is this icon actually trying to tell me? In busy traffic situations, you've got dashboard lights that flash red and yellow. If you happen to be looking out your mirror and preparing to make a lane change, and Fred, I know exactly what you're going to say to this. The yellow or red light comes on the dashboard warning me that there's a proximity event about to occur, and I'm looking to make a lane change, perhaps to avoid that proximity event, but the temptation to pull my head back to see what's going on the dashboard is difficult to ignore. So all of this is going on around the driver. Your collision, the lane departure beeping from right and left side. God help you if you get an emissions warning coming out of the dashboard at the same time. But there's a great deal going on in the cab of a typical Class 8 now in a busy urban environment. How do you separate all of these warnings out and prioritize one over the other so that the driver's not trying to guess what it is that the truck's trying to convey to them?
Other comments?
I have a last comment. I don't know where it fits. Somewhere between the regulation and voluntary, I think. I'd be remiss if I didn't express my personal opinion on it. I think there's one of three ways to get better adoption: is you regulate it, you somehow get it standard in all the OEMs, or you wait for the fleets to adopt it. I think if you're on the latter side, and I'll use the ELD mandate as an example, you will not get fleets to accept this if they have to do it voluntarily. The industry is too fragmented. There's too many individual operators, too many small fleets. There's just too much sway out there. And I think if you're waiting on voluntary acceptance, it's not going to happen. And I think it's somewhere between a regulation and somewhere between OEM standards. And I think that's where all the focus needs to be.
Gary?
Yeah, I agree with Adam. I think we're, when we look at the number of companies, we just completed this week our largest benchmarking survey of private fleets in our history. 100 companies represented a whole cross-section of many industries and businesses and routes and cargo and whatnot. And we're just amazed at the amount of, or the degree to which this new technology is being used. Why is it being used? Who's using it? We're also looking at the drivers. We'll say this about drivers. The average hire in a private fleet today is 41 years old. The average age of a fleet team is about 55 years old. So you have, and a lot of, with this mature driver comes, we think, fundamentally a safer driver who's had other life experiences and and even though may not be keen on a lot of the new technology, is a good learner. The pay of drivers is going up very fast. I mean, our average pay now is $70,000 a year in the private fleet industry. Many private fleets are paying six-figure incomes for drivers that are 10 years in service or more. So, there's a lot of positive on the driver side. The quality of person coming into the industry and sitting behind the wheel, I think, is better than it was years ago. And I think on both sides, for hire and private fleet side, they're looking for that safer, not just the cheaper driver, the safer driver from the beginning, and the person that's going to be in that cab longer. And I think there is a correlation between the longer a driver's in service and the more safer that person performs over the long haul.
Yeah, I wanted to make one more point about the voluntary agreement for AEB in the passenger vehicle fleet. One reason that worked so well, it was among 20 automakers, and by 2022, if you buy a car that's not an exotic sports car, you are going to have AEB on it. But in terms of fleet sales, there are all these delete credits, and there's a lot more customization, and probably everybody in this room understands that better than I do. But, you know, in terms of trucks, for this type of voluntary agreement to work, either we would have to have manufacturers refuse to sell a truck without AEB, or, you know, more likely than that, you have to appeal to the customers as well.
I think that Adam was spot on with what you said before, that voluntarily or self-regulation can definitely enhance the adoption rate of ADAS, but it's not enough. Regulation is a must. I think an example is the seat belts. So seat belts has existed well over a decade before they were introduced to the motor vehicle safety standard. And it's heartbreaking to think how many lives could have been saved in that decade if they were only introduced before that. We shouldn't make this mistake again with ADAS. ADAS is proven, and I think we heard there's a great data about the usefulness of AEB, FCW, LDW, headway monitoring, and other features. And I think that regulation is needed. And more than that, we also spoke about how to increase awareness and how to encourage drivers and fleets to basically invest in ADAS. And we do have representatives for the federal government here from the DOT and the NTSB. So one thing that bothered me is that the federal government itself owns over 400,000 vehicles. I think the federal government owns over 34,000 heavy-duty trucks. Hundreds of trucks are owned by the Department of Transportation, and there are vehicles with the NTSB. How many of them has any ADAS feature? If anyone wants to guess, because I got the answer from the GSA a few months ago, which was less than 100 vehicles out of a fleet of 400,000 vehicles. So I think that can be a great way for the government to lead by example by demanding that every new vehicle that the government purchases will have ADAS on it, and by make sure that retrofitting every existing vehicle with ADAS. U.S. government has 34,000 heavy-duty vehicles, exactly the kind of population that we've spoken about. They can all have forward collision warning, lane departure warnings, headway monitoring features tomorrow, if that's a decision. So I call every leadership at the administration level, leadership of every department in the government that say basically, if we want to encourage the adoption rate of ADAS, let us show the way. Let us be the first one to implement it.
I'm sorry, just want to touch base on that one because the NTSB, with their whopping 4 vehicles, we do not have the technology. But when we worked on passenger vehicle technology, we did meet with GAO, who is in charge of purchasing vehicles for the entire fleet.
You mean GSA?
GSA, thank you. Thank you. And I will say that one of the things that was very discouraging for us is GSA has tried to negotiate deals on the light vehicle side, and they can't get them unbundled because they're not that big a purchaser for the companies. So they don't like to see in the papers that the government employees are buying vehicles with leather seats, with heated seats, and because we're not able to get it unbundled with the luxury features.
That would solve a lot of problems.
Just want to add a point to, Jim's concern was right. Now, when we have independent systems, right, we have a AEB system, we're going straight, it's telling us something, and the driver's taking to make a lane change, and the other one is beeping. It's a true concern that it's possible to happen. But from a system developer standpoint, what we do here is try to prioritize the warnings, right? So, and even though these are independent systems, as we develop it, we try to make it compatible or integrate with the other systems. When it gets plugged in, it uses it. Uses the information from the lane departure warning. For example, if you're getting a forward collision warning, we try to suppress the lane departure warning if you're making a lane change. But if the driver is actually using his turn signal to make a lane change, then he's doing the right thing, right? So he is indicating to the other traffic that's what he should do. He's getting an alert in the front, and he's trying to swerve around that traffic. That means he needs to indicate the other traffic that he's doing it. So sometimes, yes, it is a nuisance, but we are like the big brother. That's what we need to do, right? And overall, as we have all these systems put together, right, so we evaluate a single system, all these other concerns come up, but when we see as a 360-degree envelope around the vehicle, everything will make sense that, okay, every system, sight systems, lane departure warning, and the forward collision warning or the collision mitigation system all get integrated, and that's the full foundation block for the higher levels of automation. We need all inputs from all sides of the vehicle to build a block, so it's not just a single system that's required to do that.
We're getting ready to wind up, and I know you guys have a few more comments you might want to make, but I thought that rather than me try to summarize some key takeaways for today, you all might try a couple of any areas of agreement. If not, I've got 4 index cards filled with them. So take your choice. I mean, number one for me was there's proven technology that exists today. We're not waiting for the fully automated vehicle to rescue us, okay? It's available now, and it can save lives now, and that forward-thinking companies are adopting the technology. Education is still important. Lots of education, continuing education for drivers as these systems change constantly. And new ones get introduced, and other drivers on the road, and other fleets, and other owner-operators and smaller operations. Regulation might speed the process, but there is a model for voluntary agreement. Cooperation, like what we're doing today, sharing ideas, best practices, talking amongst ourselves, finding out what the issues are across the table can help. There's really nothing that stops all of us, or any of us, from advancing this topic and ADAS features and the adoption of ADAS. What'd I miss? What'd I forget? Yes. Gary.
I'd just like to probably add to one that you talked about, and that's the power of the partnership. The partnerships not only with, obviously, the vendors and the carriers, but the drivers, the benchmarking. Really, it's going to come down to, when we talk about the messaging, is really getting the messaging throughout even to the smaller carriers. There is this apprehension or this level of fear when really, you look at all the partners here in this room today, everybody's together and really understands it and breaks down those barriers. So just to add to that point, I think really the power is in the partnership.
Thank you. Dr. Riegel?
I just wanted to add that, it may be proven technology and safe, but then there's the safe operating performance once it's out there, and that needs to be addressed.
Fred?
So just a couple of closing comments. In general, drivers are still going to be important to the safety equation. They're not going to go away anytime soon, no matter what the hype about autonomous vehicles is. Number two, we are going to see more integration of the various systems on the vehicle to work together to be able to deliver more levels of performance. Number three, vehicle-to-vehicle communication is very important, not just for light vehicles, but for heavy vehicles as well. I'm a little disappointed in the fact that the FMVSS 150 was only focused on light vehicles, because the more information that we can get into the driver assistance systems enables us to be able to do more in terms of alerting as well as intervening as necessary. And then lastly, if you're not embracing data today, please start. because it's going to be a big part of these systems moving forward. And it's an important part of, again, getting a complete picture of what your drivers are doing, what's happening out in the field, and being able to customize the driver training to fit the individual needs instead of one size fits all. And thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here, all the panelists. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you for being so frank and honest and sharing your views and opinions. I'd like to thank those of you in the audience for participating and for the questions. I'd like to thank those online that are watching. We appreciate your participation as well. This will be hosted online. And I also wanted to remind you all that there is a whole other day tomorrow, another conference day tomorrow. My boss, Debbie Hersman, will be doing the keynote there tomorrow morning. And we will continue discussing these issues tomorrow as well. And there are some tables out front with some handout information for all of you who would like to get some more information about what we have been discussing. But anyway, thank you all very much.